My ruthless mother-in-law demanded I hand over my $150 million company to my husband. I saw through their greed and refused. That's when they bribed my own employees to burn my company to the ground, leaving me with nothing. But they didn't know what I had planned. The very next morning, they woke up to a shocking twist they never saw coming, and their world spiraled out of control. I never thought I'd be sitting here recounting the story of how my world was nearly destroyed. My name is Maya Rivers. I'm 33, a fashion designer, and until a few years ago, I believed I was living the perfect life. I had inherited my father's legacy, a $150 million sustainable clothing empire, and I poured every ounce of my creativity and energy into making it thrive. I loved my work, the fast-paced energy of New York City, and the belief that I was building something meaningful, something my father would be proud of. But then came Daniel Hawthorne. When I first met him, I was swept off my feet. Daniel was everything society told me to look for: charming, handsome, and the heir to an old money family fortune. We met at a charity gala, one of those glitzy events where I always felt slightly out of place despite my success. Daniel had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. He said all the right things, made me laugh, and within months, I found myself saying yes to his proposal. Looking back, I should have noticed the small cracks early on, but love has a way of blinding you. His mother, Judith Hawthorne, was another story entirely. From the moment we met, she made it clear that she didn't approve of me. I wasn't what she imagined for her precious son. To her, I was a career-obsessed outsider trying to tarnish the Hawthorne family's impeccable image. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't marrying her after all. But Judith was persistent, meddling, and unkind in ways that made me doubt myself. After the wedding, things changed. Subtly at first. Daniel started making comments about how I worked too much or how a wife's role should be in the home. I brushed them off as harmless opinions, but they grew sharper, more pointed. Judith would chime in, suggesting I hand over control of my father's company to Daniel. "He's more experienced with money, dear," she'd say with a patronizing smile. The idea of giving up my life's work felt unthinkable, but I didn't want to cause waves in my marriage, so I avoided confrontation. I wish I had spoken up earlier, because things escalated quickly. One evening, during a particularly tense dinner, Judith laid it all out. "Maya, it's time to make a choice," she said. "You're part of the Hawthorne family now. That means leaving behind childish dreams of running a business. Daniel can take care of everything." I froze. "Childish dreams?" I repeated. "This company is my father's legacy." "It's my legacy." Her expression hardened. "Your duty is to this family, not to some vanity project." Daniel stayed silent, staring at his plate, and in that moment, something in me cracked. "I won't do it," I said firmly. "I'm not giving up my company, and I'm not giving up who I am." Judith's eyes narrowed, and she exchanged a look with Daniel. "We'll see about that," she said coldly. At the time, I thought it was an empty threat. But things only grew worse from there. Daniel became distant, his temper flaring at the smallest things. He criticized my every move, from how I managed my team to how I spent my time. Judith started showing up unannounced, hovering over me like a vulture. I could feel them both working to wear me down, but I refused to yield. The breaking point came one night when I got a call at 2 a.m. My assistant was frantic. "Maya, the factory, it's on fire." I remember rushing out of bed, my heart pounding, as Daniel lazily asked where I was going. "The factory's on fire," I said, already grabbing my coat. His response chilled me. "Oh, that's a shame." The scene at the factory was chaos. Flames roared, smoke filled the air, and firefighters struggled to control the blaze. Half the property was gone by the time the fire was extinguished. I stood there, watching everything my father and I had built reduced to ashes. I felt numb, but deep down, something didn't sit right. Accidents happen, sure, but this felt deliberate. The next morning, the reports rolled in. Faulty wiring, they said. A tragic coincidence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. As I sifted through the rubble, Daniel and Judith barely seemed concerned. Judith even suggested I sell the remaining assets. Cut your losses, she said casually. Maybe it's a sign that you're meant to focus on more important things. Her words stung. My instinct screamed that something was off, but I didn't know where to start. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator, Liam Carter. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I got them. Little did I know, what Liam would uncover would shatter whatever remnants of trust one had left. But at that moment, standing amidst the ruins, I could only feel one thing: determination. They wanted to break me, to take everything I had. But they underestimated me. And that was their biggest mistake. The days after the fire felt like a haze. I barely slept, replaying every moment in my head. I kept thinking about the timing, the details, and most of all, Judith's unnervingly calm reaction. Something about her demeanor wasn't just cold, it was calculated. Daniel, on the other hand, acted as if the fire was an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe. He made no effort to comfort me, or even pretend he cared. His apathy stung more than anything else. I threw myself into rebuilding what I could, salvaging my remaining assets and reassuring my employees. But even as I worked, my gut told me there was more to this fire than met the eye. That's when I reached out to Liam Carter, a private investigator I'd been recommended by a friend. Liam was in his early 40s, sharp-eyed, and exuded quiet confidence. He listened carefully as I told him about the fire, my suspicions, and the growing tension with Daniel and Judith. "You think this wasn't an accident," he said, more of a statement than a question. "I know it wasn't," I replied firmly. "I just need proof." Liam nodded.
"All right.
I'll start with the basics: CCTV footage, employee interviews, and a closer look at the financials of your business. If there's something to uncover, I'll find it." For the next few weeks, I kept myself busy, but the wait for Liam's findings was agonizing. Daniel grew more distant, spending nights away from home without explanation. When I confronted him, he dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "I've got business to handle," he said, his tone dripping with annoyance. "Maybe you should focus on figuring out what to do with your situation." My situation. That's what he called the fire that had nearly destroyed my life's work. It was becoming clearer with each passing day that Daniel was no longer the man I thought I'd married, or maybe he never had been. I started paying closer attention to his behavior. He took more calls in private, had hushed conversations with Judith, and whenever I entered the room, they'd both fall silent. It wasn't paranoia anymore. Something was going on. Liam's first update came 2 weeks later, and what he shared left me reeling. "I've reviewed the CCTV footage from the night of the fire," he began, sliding a laptop across the table toward me. "Watch this." The grainy video showed 2 of my employees entering the factory hours before the fire started. I recognized them immediately. Mark and Elena, both longtime staff members I had trusted implicitly. The footage showed them fiddling with machinery and sprinkling what looked like liquid from a canister across the floor. "Arson," Liam confirmed. "The fire wasn't caused by faulty wiring, Maya. It was deliberate." I felt sick to my stomach.
"But why?"
"Why would they do this?" Liam's expression darkened. "That's where things get interesting." I spoke to Mark and Elena separately. At first, they denied everything, but when I showed them the footage, they cracked. They admitted they were paid to start the fire.
"Paid?
By who?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. He hesitated before answering, as if weighing how much to say. "Judith and Daniel." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "You're sure?" They were careful, but not careful enough. Bank records show large, unexplained transfers from an account linked to Daniel. Mark and Elena received those payments just days before the fire. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process the betrayal. Judith and Daniel, my husband and his mother, had conspired to destroy my business. I felt anger rising in me, hot and blinding. They had taken everything I loved, everything I'd worked for, and burned it to the ground. For what? Power? Control? I couldn't fathom how they could be so cruel. "What do I do now?" I asked Liam, my voice shaking. "We build a case," he said simply. "You've got enough here to go to the authorities. But if you want this to stick, we'll need more emails, phone records, anything that ties them directly to the arson. Over the next few weeks, Liam continued to dig, and the evidence he uncovered painted a damning picture. There were emails between Judith and Daniel discussing their plan in coded language, phone records showing late-night calls to Mark and Elena, and even a paper trail of bribes paid to other employees to keep quiet about what they knew. Despite the mounting evidence, I didn't confront Daniel or Judith. Not yet. Instead, I played the part of the oblivious wife, biding my time while Liam and my attorney, Sandra Torres, prepared a legal case. Sandra was a no-nonsense powerhouse of a woman, known for her expertise in high-profile cases. When I showed her the evidence, she didn't mince words.
"This is airtight," she said.
They won't get away with it. But pretending everything was normal was the hardest part. Every time I sat across from Daniel at dinner or endured one of Judith's smug remarks, I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I knew, that their plan had failed, that I would see them brought to justice. But I couldn't risk tipping them off. Not yet. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what I could, even as the weight of their betrayal threatened to crush me. My father's voice echoed in my mind during those dark days. "Maya, no matter what happens, never let anyone take away your integrity or your strength." I clung to those words like a lifeline. They had tried to destroy me, but they didn't know me. I wasn't the weak, obedient woman Judith wanted me to be, and I wasn't going to let them win. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, they would realize just how much they had underestimated me. Sitting across from Daniel every night, pretending nothing had changed, was an exercise in restraint. I could feel the weight of the lies between us, and it took everything in me to keep playing the role of the clueless wife. But deep down, I knew I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the woman who had once trusted him, who had believed in his charm and easy smile. Now, I was biding my time, gathering strength, and preparing for the moment I'd bring him and Judith down. The evidence Liam uncovered was damning. There were incriminating bank records, conversations between Judith and Daniel discussing how to handle the Maya problem, and even witness testimony from employees who had been bribed to keep quiet. Sandra, my lawyer, assured me that we had enough to take them to court. But I wasn't ready yet. Not until I had everything lined up perfectly. I wanted to make sure there was no way they could wriggle out of this. Then one evening, something happened that nearly broke my composure. I came home to find Judith sitting in my living room, sipping tea, like she owned the place. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, but her presence was enough to set my nerves on edge. "Maya," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thought it was time we had a little chat. Woman to woman. I forced myself to stay calm. "About what?" "Oh, you know," she said, setting her teacup down with a deliberate clink.
"Life.
Choices. The future." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You've been through so much lately. The fire, the stress of rebuilding. It's all very unfortunate." My fists clenched at my sides, but I kept my voice even. "It is. But I'll manage." "Of course you will," she said smoothly. "You've always been so determined. But sometimes, determination isn't enough. Sometimes, you have to know when to let go. Don't you think it's time to consider selling what's left of your company? It's a burden, Maya. And Daniel can help you start fresh." I stared at her, the mask finally slipping. Her words were laced with veiled threats, but I could see the greed in her eyes. She wasn't even pretending to hide it anymore. They wanted me to give up everything, my company, my legacy, my identity, so they could claim it for themselves. "Thank you for your concern, Judith," I said, my voice cold. "But I'm not giving up. Not now, not ever." Her smile faltered for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something, anger, maybe even fear. "Well," she said, standing and smoothing her skirt, "I hope you know what you're doing. For your sake." She left without another word, and as the door closed behind her, I felt a surge of determination. They were getting desperate. They knew I wasn't going to back down, and it was only a matter of time before they made their next move. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. A week later, Liam came to me with the final piece of the puzzle, a recording of a conversation between Judith and Daniel, discussing the fire in detail. They talked about paying off the employees, staging the scene to look like an accident, and even their plans to force me into selling the company afterward. It was all there, clear as day. "It's over," Liam said, handing me the file. "This is the nail in the coffin." I nodded, my heart pounding. "It's time." Sandra wasted no time filing the lawsuit. The charges were serious: arson, conspiracy, fraud. The media caught wind of the story almost immediately, and within days, it was all anyone could talk about. Headlines screamed about the fashion empire scandal, and photos of Judith and Daniel were plastered across every news outlet. They denied everything, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming. When the summons arrived, Daniel finally confronted me. I was in the kitchen, going over some documents, when he stormed in, his face red with anger. "What the hell is this, Maya?" he demanded, waving the papers in my face. "You're suing me? Your own husband?" I stood my ground, meeting his glare with unwavering resolve. "You're not my husband, Daniel. Not anymore. A husband doesn't destroy his wife's life for money. A husband doesn't conspire with his mother to burn down everything she's worked for." His face twisted with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice icy. "I have the proof, Daniel. The emails, the phone calls, the money transfers. I know everything." For a moment, he looked stunned, like he hadn't expected me to fight back. Then, his expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Maya. You're going to regret this." "No," I said, my voice steady. "The only mistake I made was trusting you." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, and I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The fight was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. As the court date approached, the media frenzy intensified. Journalists camped outside my house, and every detail of the case was dissected on talk shows and social media. It was exhausting, but I stayed focused. I had a team of brilliant lawyers, rock-solid evidence, and a fire inside me that refused to be extinguished. The night before the trial, I sat alone in my office, looking at a photo of my father. "I'll make this right, Dad," I whispered. "I'll protect what you built." The next morning, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, ready to face whatever came next. The courtroom was packed that day. I remember walking in, feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on me. The media had dubbed the trial the Hawthorne betrayal, and everyone was eager to see how it would unfold. But I wasn't here for the cameras or the spectacle. I was here to reclaim my life, my father's legacy, and my dignity. Daniel and Judith sat at the defense table, their expressions carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in their body language. For once, they weren't in control. Judith occasionally whispered to Daniel, her sharp features betraying flickers of worry. Daniel avoided looking at me altogether. It didn't matter. They couldn't intimidate me anymore. Sandra Torres, my lawyer, was a force to be reckoned with. She began the case with a clear, powerful statement. "This is a story of betrayal, greed, and the deliberate destruction of a woman's life's work. We have evidence that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Judith and Daniel Hawthorne conspired to destroy Maya Rivers' business for their own gain." The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. CCTV footage of my employees setting the fire, bank records showing the bribes paid from Daniel's account, emails between Judith and Daniel discussing the arson, and the damning audio recording where they detailed their plan in their own voices. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together for the jury, and the picture it painted was undeniable. I sat silently, listening to every word, reliving every painful moment. When Mark and Elena, the employees who had set the fire, took the stand to testify, it was difficult to keep my emotions in check. They admitted to their roles, explaining how Judith and Daniel had pressured and paid them to commit the crime. Their guilt was palpable, and while I felt a measure of anger toward them, I couldn't help but pity them as well. They'd been pawns in a much larger game. The defense tried to discredit me, of course. They painted me as a cold, career-obsessed woman who had neglected her husband and antagonized his family. Judith's lawyer even suggested that I was fabricating the accusations out of spite. But Sandra dismantled their arguments with precision and grace. Every piece of evidence was airtight, every witness credible. The more they tried to shift blame, the more desperate they seemed. When it was my turn to testify, I felt a mixture of fear and resolve. I took a deep breath and faced the jury. My father built this company with his blood, sweat, and tears. I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to choke me. When he passed, I vowed to carry on his legacy, to honor his hard work and vision. I trusted Daniel and his family. I believed they wanted what was best for me, for us. But they didn't. They saw my success as a threat, something to control and, if necessary, destroys. I looked directly at Judith and Daniel, who finally met my gaze.
They thought they could break me.
But they underestimated me. The court was silent as I finished my testimony. I felt a strange sense of catharsis, as if a weight I'd been carrying for months had finally lifted. No matter what happened, I knew I'd done everything I could to fight for what was right. The jury deliberated for hours, though it felt like days. When they finally returned, the air in the courtroom was electric with anticipation. My heart raced as the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. On the charges of arson, conspiracy, and fraud, we find the defendants guilty. The room erupted in whispers and gasps, but I barely heard them. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe. Judith and Daniel sat frozen, their faces pale. The judge sentenced them to lengthy prison terms, and while I knew it wouldn't undo the damage they had caused, it felt like justice. The employees involved in the arson also faced legal consequences, though their sentences were less severe. The court acknowledged that they had been manipulated, but their actions couldn't go unpunished. As for me, the court awarded me full ownership of the Hawthorne family's properties as restitution for the financial and emotional devastation they had caused. It was a symbolic victory as much as a practical one, a way to ensure that the Hawthornes' ill-gotten power would no longer overshadow me. Rebuilding my company wasn't easy. The financial loss was immense, and the emotional scars ran deep. But with the support of my remaining employees, loyal clients, and newfound allies, I poured my heart into restoring what had been lost. And in time, we not only recovered but thrived. The fire had been meant to destroy me, but it had forged something stronger instead. In the years that followed, my story became a beacon of hope for others facing betrayal and hardship. People would write to me, telling me how my fight for justice inspired them to stand up for themselves. It was humbling, and it reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. Looking back, I see now that the fire wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of another. Judith and Daniel tried to strip me of everything, but they couldn't take away my resilience, my determination, or my integrity. And in the end, those were the things that mattered most. My father used to say, "Maya, true strength is not about avoiding the flames. It's about rising from the ashes." I understand that now more than ever.
This is my story.
It's not just about betrayal or revenge. It's about finding the courage to rebuild, to fight for what's right, and to never let anyone take away your power. It's about resilience. And I hope it's a reminder that no matter how dark things get, there's always a way to rise.
"This is where my parents live," Ethan suddenly declared upon his visit. Behind him, his in-laws nodded happily. I was in the middle of an online meeting and quickly apologized to the other party before ending the call. I had even informed them about a meeting at 1 p.m. Irritated, I turned my gaze toward the door. "Why did you come all of a sudden?" I asked, maintaining my composure. My father-in-law proudly replied, "We'll pay off the mortgage, so please leave." It was hard to suppress a laugh at his statement. My mother-in-law had never worked, and my father-in-law was just staying at home without any employment. Yet Ethan was completely in favor of his parents' opinion. Disappointed by his stance, I considered divorce. "Then I'll leave," I quickly replied, to the surprise of all three of them. "The mortgage of the house is $5,000 per month." With an inward smile, I began to pack seriously. Luckily, I had a business trip scheduled for a week, starting the next day. With my suitcase and bank book ready, I headed to the entrance. "Goodbye, then," I said as I left the house. First, I'd start by transferring the house's title to Ethan. I felt excited thinking about my plans. "My name is Shelley Owen. I am 47 years old and work as a web designer. I went independent 5 years ago and have been fortunate enough to receive many project checks. As a result, I've earned more than 5 times my previous salary and now live on the top floor of a high-rise condo. I met Ethan, my husband, 3 years ago through Ashley, my former boss. He is Ashley's cousin. He's kind and honest, but had trouble maintaining relationships, so he had been single for a long time. Around that time, my business was doing well, and I bought the top floor of a high-rise condo, doubling as an office. I wasn't planning on marrying, but Ashley strongly suggested I meet Ethan. When I met him, he was very gentle and attractive, looking much younger than his actual age. He listened to me talk about my job and complimented me a lot, which drew me to him quickly. We started dating and got engaged within 6 months. My parents had already passed away, and my only relative was my brother, so my brother and his wife also attended the family meeting. From Ethan's side, his parents and cousin Ashley came. The meeting went smoothly overall. However, my sister-in-law's comment, "This seems stiff," left me puzzled. I never imagined her words would become reality. After marrying, Ethan moved into my house, and we started our life together. His workplace was harsh, requiring him to leave early in the morning and return home past midnight. Despite this, his salary was only a quarter of mine. One day I suggested to Ethan, who was exhausted and went to sleep immediately every day, "It's bad for your health. Why don't you look for another job?" However, he reprimanded me with a face full of anger. "Are you saying I should quit my job? Are you looking down on me because I earn less?" I was surprised by Ethan's strong reaction, as we had never argued before. Feeling uncomfortable about unintentionally disrespecting his job, I decided to apologize sincerely. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way. I'm just worried about your health." He softened. "My apologies, too. I overreacted. You've always taken care of the house, and I shouldn't have scolded you." Ethan quickly calmed down, and our first argument ended swiftly. However, it became difficult to suggest a job change afterward. Ethan's return time got even later, and he eventually spent half the week at the office. While I was concerned about his health, he seemed to enjoy his job, so I decided to support him as much as I could by creating a relaxing environment whenever he returned home. "Hey, about my dad's medical expenses, could we increase the remittance a bit?" Ethan suggested this when his father was in the hospital with back pain. Sighing inwardly at his request in his father's hospital room, I didn't hesitate to help my in-laws, as I had no parents of my own. Our household depended on my income, with Ethan contributing a part of his salary to his parents. His salary wasn't low for a man in his 40s, but the exact amount he kept for himself was unclear. However, it was evident he was providing enough for his parents not to struggle. I couldn't agree when he insisted on increasing the remittance because it was, in the first place, possible only due to my income. Yet it was hard to refuse in front of his parents. "Ethan, you're kind. Thank you so much. It's a big help," they said, looking at both of us. Under their pressure, I reluctantly agreed to increase the remittance. Afterward, my in-laws started demanding money for various reasons, not just the remittance. I wanted to refuse, but they knew I would say no, so they approached Ethan instead. Especially weak to his mother's requests, Ethan often decided to increase the remittance whenever she asked. On the day his father returned from the hospital, after sending my in-laws off in a taxi, Ethan and I returned home. only to find, surprisingly, that his parents, who were supposed to have gone home, were waiting outside our house. "It's tough for Dad to climb our stairs, so I thought we'd take care of him here until his back is fully healed," Ethan said. "What? You can't just spring that on me." My surprised reaction made my mother-in-law frown. My father-in-law stood in front of the door as if to say, "Let us in quickly." "Ethan, that's okay, right?" "Of course, don't worry," Ethan replied. I stared at him in shock. He avoided my gaze. From his reaction, I realized that Ethan and his parents had already discussed this. "Fine, you can stay here until you're fully recovered," I said reluctantly and invited my in-laws inside. They looked around the house and sat on the living room sofa. "Look, they live in such a nice house. Our house is 50 years old and falling apart, right, Dad?" "Yeah, it's run down. Getting old is tough." My in-laws conversed, and Ethan just nodded. It seemed they planned to stay here for a long time. To be honest, since I was sending them a substantial amount of money every time. Living together might be less of a financial burden. However, that's not enough reason to accept living together. Renovating old houses is trendy these days. "How about doing that, Ethan?" I suggested. "Yeah, maybe," Ethan replied. 2 years into our marriage, though it's supposedly still in the honeymoon phase, we hardly spend time together. We haven't even gone on a honeymoon, and this place was my home and office. It's fine when Ethan is out for work, but my in-laws would be here all day. With them around, meetings in the living room become difficult. If we were to live together, I'd prefer moving into my in-laws' house and using this place solely as an office. Thanks to my initial resistance, the in-laws didn't bring up living together again. However, even months after my father-in-law's discharge from the hospital, my mother-in-law showed no intention of taking him back, only returning to their home to clean. Moreover, their belongings started overflowing from the guest room into the living room. "Ethan, your dad seems perfectly healthy now. He even went bowling today. Maybe it's time for them to go home," I said, sensing Ethan's discomfort. "What are you saying?" Ethan raised his voice, and I fell silent. Seeing my reaction, Ethan seemed to think that raising his voice would make me comply. He frequently insisted loudly on his opinions, though I didn't always comply. Opposing him led to my mother-in-law siding with Ethan, putting me at a 3-to-1 disadvantage. This went on for 2 years. During this time, I took care of all the housework, while my in-laws often went out to enjoy themselves. Despite his back being fully healed, my father-in-law showed no signs of returning home. "Sorry, I have a meeting at 1:00 p.m. today, so I'll eat lunch in my room, okay? But leave the dishes for later," my mother-in-law replied without looking up as I put lunch on the table. Ethan had taken the day off and was planning to go out with my in-laws in the afternoon. He wouldn't take time off for our anniversary, but would do so on his parents' requests. Thinking this, I responded, understood, and headed to my office. Right at 1:00 p.m., my online meeting started, but about 10 minutes in, footsteps approached, and the door burst open. "This is where me and my parents live," Ethan declared, barging into the room with my in-laws nodding behind him. I hastily apologized to the meeting participants and ended the call. "I told you I had a meeting at 1 p.m., I complained internally while heading towards the door. "Why are you doing this all of a sudden?" I asked calmly, only for my father-in-law to smugly say, "We'll pay the mortgage so you can leave." I struggled to suppress my laughter at his words. My mother-in-law had never worked, and my father-in-law stayed at home without working, yet Ethan completely supported them. Deciding on divorce, I simply said, "All right, I'll leave," surprising all 3 of them. The mortgage of the house is $5,000 per month. Smiling inwardly, I started packing with a serious expression. Luckily, I had a week-long business trip starting the next day. With my prepared suitcases and bankbook, I headed for the entrance. "Goodbye, then," I said before leaving my home. The first thing to do was to transfer the house title to Ethan. Feeling excited about the next steps, I checked into a hotel and immediately contacted a real estate agent to transfer the house to Ethan, including the mortgage. The transfer depended on Ethan's ability to pay the mortgage. If he couldn't, he'd have to make a lump sum payment or sell the house. I accepted this and asked the agent to find me a new home and office. My work could be done from anywhere with a computer, but I needed an office for calm discussions with clients. The agent found a suitable place about 40 minutes' drive from my previous place. It was well equipped with excellent security. I viewed it and decided to buy it immediately after returning from a trip. It was a luxurious apartment, almost like a villa. It felt a bit too luxurious, but I considered it a reward for my efforts and decided to buy it. I could move in within a week, so I stayed in temporary accommodation until then. After all the necessary documents were ready, I left the packing and moving process to a moving company. Ethan hadn't been informed about the mortgage transfer. During the move, my in-laws and Ethan helped while speaking ill of me. When the movers finished, one commented, "You have a difficult family," making me blush with embarrassment. A week later, after settling into my new home, I received a call from Ethan. "What's this about changing the mortgage?" he asked anxiously, with his father shouting in the background. It seemed that Ethan finally understood the situation about the mortgage. "But we're getting a divorce, right? It's unfair for me to pay the mortgage if you're the ones living there," Ethan exclaimed. However, I couldn't agree with him. If he intended to act like they never told me to leave the house, I pressed a play button on the nearby computer, and our conversation from that day started playing. "Why did you record this?" Ethan was startled. "I was in a web meeting, so I recorded it for documentation," I explained. "I usually use an IC recorder for meetings and share the recorded audio after getting consent from the other party." I had mentioned this to Ethan before, but he seemed to have forgotten. "Really? Is that true?" Ethan sounded flustered over the phone. "So good luck with the mortgage repayments, but first, you'll have to pass the credit check," I said. "How much is the mortgage anyway? Can I afford it on my salary?" Ethan asked, which made me laugh. I had informed him about the monthly mortgage amount when we got married, and I showed him all the documents. But it seemed he never paid attention, thinking I would end up paying. "Let's see if you can. The mortgage is $5,000 a month. Did you hear that?" Upon hearing the mortgage amount, Ethan was speechless on the other end of the phone. I could hear his mother asking Ethan, "How much is it?" Ethan was too shocked to answer her question. Then his mother took the phone, and I had a new conversation partner. "Where are you?" "The mortgage can't be that much." She sounded irritated and started to tell me how incompetent I was as a wife. She insisted that I should pay the mortgage because I had caused them trouble. After finishing her rant with a triumphant tone, she said, "Don't think you can come back for Ethan's salary. We won't help you anymore." It seemed Ethan hadn't told his parents about his actual salary. "A son who sends us so much money every month can't be struggling financially. He'll keep taking care of us, so we have no worries," his mother confidently continued. I couldn't help but burst into laughter while listening to his mother boasting. My sudden laughter angered her. I decided to give her a dose of reality. $4,000, I said. "What? The mortgage?" "No, that's Ethan's monthly salary." "What? Really?" She was shocked by my words and seemed frozen for a while. But then she started laughing. "That's impossible. Ethan has been sending us $4,000 every month. If his salary was $4,000, he would have been sending us all of it. Stop lying," she yelled, not believing me. I calmly pointed her to the evidence. "Look at the shelf right by the entrance of the living room. You'll find Ethan's salary slips there. If you doubt it, check for yourself." You're just lying," she said and headed to the indicated shelf. I could hear Ethan trying to stop her in the background. Soon her voice of surprise came through the phone. "What? There's not even $4,000 here. Ethan, What's the meaning of this? Since the beginning of our marriage, I've been tormented by my snide mother-in-law and father-in-law. To make matters worse, they've constantly berated me for not being able to have children. To add insult to injury, even my husband, who was supposed to support me, said to me, "My sister-in-law is young and beautiful, and unlike you, she's had kids right away." I'm honestly jealous of my brother. Moreover, my mother-in-law accused me of being infertile because I was having an affair. She claimed she had caught me on a hidden camera as proof of my so-called infidelity. So I devised a plan and called a family gathering under the pretext of celebrating my nephew's birthday. I proposed we watch the evidence of my alleged affair that my mother-in-law was talking about. Upon viewing it, words like "I knew it" slipped out in despair for my sister-in-law and my father-in-law. My name is Mia. I'm 34 years old. I work in the international business division of a mid-sized trading company. I live with my husband Ken, who is the same age as me and works at a steel manufacturer, and my in-laws. We don't have any children yet. I met my husband at a dating event that a friend invited me to. By my 4th year on the job, I was finally getting the hang of it and starting to enjoy it. So I wasn't very interested in getting married, but I couldn't refuse my college friend who insisted, "You have to come." My main interest was solely focused on the special menus that each restaurant had prepared for the dating event. A case of a free meal is better than the songs of birds. I felt somewhat detached from my friend, who was actively mingling, but it turned out that she had become close to a man who was there with Ken. Ken wasn't too keen on the event either and had been reluctantly dragged along. Somehow, as bystanders, we ended up hanging out together. But since I intended it to be a one-time thing, I deliberately didn't exchange contact information with him. However, exactly 1 week after the dating event, on a Friday, I received a call from an unknown number on my phone. At first, I ignored it, but after work, I started receiving calls every 10 minutes. Who on earth is this? I was annoyed and about to block the number, but before I did that, I answered the phone to see who was making such a persistent call. Anyway, it turned out to be Ken, whom I met at the dating event. "Oh good, is this Mia?" he said outright. While I was relieved to find out who it was, I was unsure that I had given my number to Ken at that time. When I questioned Ken, he casually replied, "I got this number by begging a friend who was with me at the event." It seemed that my friend, who had hit it off with Ken's friend, decided to start dating him following the dating event. Meanwhile, Ken, having failed to get my contact information, heard about this from his friend and managed to get my number by pestering my friend. Although I was negatively surprised by my friend for casually sharing my number and by Ken for taking advantage of that, we somehow started dating, and a year later he proposed to me. It wasn't exactly a whirlwind romance, but I thought I could live a peaceful life with Ken, who had a somewhat gentle and endearing personality. There were no issues from my side regarding the marriage. My parents had been living separately since I entered college. They hadn't divorced because they saw no particular benefit in doing so. At this point, friends and acquaintances would ask if I wasn't sad, but having been practically estranged from my own family, I saw their separation as an inevitable outcome. I was financially supported by my parents during my college years, so I visited their houses alternately during long vacations. However, since I started working, I have been using my busy work schedule as an excuse to solely report what's going on social networking sites. So when I informed my parents about my marriage, they said they would attend a ceremony if one was held. But when I told them it would just be a registration with no special ceremony, they later sent me a substantial sum of money as a wedding gift, which was more than enough for me. However, my in-laws, Sarah and Sean, seemed dissatisfied with my parents' handling of the marriage. To think they would settle their only daughter's marriage with money, how incredibly insensitive, they sneered. Indeed, it's quite concerning, they said with a bitter tone. But then my now husband Ken defended me, saying, Money is certainly a sign of love. It's absurd for Mom, who has never worked, to say such a thing. Dad should know better given how hard earning money is. I felt truly happy for choosing him. Still laughing, I responded to his anger. Yes, it seems I wasn't the perfect wife. I had my earnings taken, was burdened with all household chores, and even though I said I didn't want children, I was berated for being infertile. I'm not strong enough to endure that. Still defiant, you should understand by now that once we're divorced, I'll have nothing to do with you. How about her as a new wife candidate? She's young, might be good for you. I signaled my lawyer, who, regaining composure, pulled out a photograph. It showed Ethan entering a hotel with a young woman. What is this? I took it, and entering the room was my former boss and Ethan's cousin, Ashley. Ethan was shocked and speechless at the sight of Ashley. Ashley sat next to me and handed me a handkerchief. Uncle, Aunt, I didn't introduce Ethan to Ariadne to make her unhappy, Ashley said. Ethan's parents were angry about this matter, so they will likely reprimand his parents. Seeing Ethan and his parents quiet down, I submitted the divorce application and documents related to compensation. Ethan seemed to want to say something but remained silent under Ashley's sharp gaze. Promptly signing the documents, "By the way, this woman has a message for you. She wasn't aware that you were already married. She had already met with my parents and booked a wedding venue. Calling this a fraud, she is demanding compensation, so be prepared." What? That can't be true. Shocked by the decisive message, Ethan began to cry in despair. Ethan had been matching with young women on a dating site multiple times. The woman in the photo was one of them and deeply loved him. This revelation shocked his parents too. His father, surprised by the situation, was stunned. Ashley had investigated Ethan's infidelity, explained the situation to the woman, and introduced her to a lawyer. I never met the woman directly, but I was pained by her apology over the phone. Ariadne, divorce seems inevitable with irreconcilable differences, but about the house, shouldn't the mortgage payments be considered? His mother started. So I informed her that Ethan was now the owner of the house and that it was being sold because he failed the credit assessment. No way, his mother slumped in despair. We then left the restaurant. Within a month, Ashley informed me that Ethan and his parents had moved from the high-rise condo to an apartment due to his parents' spending habits. Ethan's salary alone couldn't sustain them, and they had even asked Ashley for rent assistance. The compensation for both the deceived woman on the dating site and myself was being covered by Ashley's parents. Surprisingly, Ashley had started dating Ethan's former lawyer. She was drawn to his decisiveness. "We never know what life will bring," she said, looking very happy. As for me, I started blogging about these events, which unexpectedly garnered attention, leading to new opportunities as a writer. Enjoying writing, I lead a busy yet fulfilling life. In fact, since the divorce, I've been strongly pursued by a corporate executive I knew through business, and recently, our relationship turned romantic. He's trustworthy and has suggested we live together, but I'm still pondering my response. In truth, my mind is already made up. I just need the courage to convey my decision. Looking forward to our date tomorrow. Today I'm again seated in front of my computer. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Retaliation Realm channel.
I never imagined that my life would be turned upside down like this. My name is Nina, and I'm a 38-year-old nurse living in Austin, Texas. It's been a whirlwind of emotions over the past few weeks, and I find myself compelled to share my story. I need to make sense of it all, if that's even possible. It started with an email, just an email. Mark, my husband of 15 years, a freelance graphic designer, had always been somewhat unpredictable. But nothing could have prepared me for the cold, detached message he sent. He wrote that he had fallen in love with someone else and was leaving us, me and our 12-year-old daughter, Sophia. His words cut deep. I'm starting a new life with her. I'm taking the car. You'll need to deal with the debt. The car in question wasn't just any car. It was a luxury vehicle we had bought on loan in my name. We had taken out a $40,000 loan to get it, hoping it would bring some excitement into our lives. Now, it seemed to symbolize everything that had gone wrong. I was left with the burden of repaying the debt, while Mark, it seemed, would drive away with the one thing I had hoped would make our lives better. I remember the shock washing over me like a tidal wave. My mind raced. How could he do this to us? I tried calling him, sending texts, even reaching out to mutual friends, but he was nowhere to be found. Every attempt to contact him was met with silence. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving only his betrayal behind. To make matters worse, I discovered that the divorce papers we had discussed during one of our more heated arguments were missing. I had been so focused on trying to keep our family together, trying to make things work, that I had put off dealing with those papers. Now, it seemed Mark had taken them, perhaps as part of his departure, leaving me not only heartbroken but also financially strained. Sophia, my bright and observant daughter, noticed that something was wrong. She'd always been perceptive for her age, and I knew I couldn't hide the truth from her forever. She saw the sleepless nights and the growing stress etched on my face. One evening, she approached me with that look of concern only a child who truly cares can muster. "Mom, where's Dad? Why isn't he coming back?" The moment those words left her lips, I felt my heart crack a little more. I sat her down and told her everything. I explained how Mark had left us and how we were in a difficult situation, both emotionally and financially. Her response surprised me. She took it remarkably well, as if she had been expecting it all along. She remained calm, her maturity in the face of this crisis both comforting and heartbreaking. I tried to hold myself together for Sophia's sake, but the weight of everything was crushing me. My work as a nurse, which had always been a source of pride and purpose, started to feel like an unbearable burden. One day, while I was at the hospital, the stress became too much. I collapsed in the break room, my vision blurring, my heart racing. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. They told me I needed immediate surgery for a serious illness that had been exacerbated by my stress. As I lay there recovering, I faced another blow. I checked my savings account and found that the $25,000 I had diligently saved was now reduced to a mere $42.10. Mark had withdrawn every last penny without my knowledge. It was a cruel blow, making me feel even more helpless. But Sophia, even in her young age, was not one to be easily defeated. Determined to support me, she came up with a plan. She suggested we use a GPS app on our phones to track down Mark. Her idea was simple yet brilliant, and it gave me a sliver of hope. Together, we began to take action. Sophia's resourcefulness and quick thinking were astonishing, and they provided me with a renewed sense of determination. 3 days later, Mark contacted me, pleading for help. He was being questioned by the police about the stolen luxury car. The irony of it all was not lost on me. With Sophia by my side, I agreed to meet him at a nearby forest park where he had been camping. Lydia, Mark's mistress, was with him, her presence adding another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation. Meeting Mark at the forest park was a surreal experience. The park's serene surroundings felt like a cruel contrast to the chaos that had enveloped my life. As Sophia and I approached the meeting spot, I could see Mark's luxury car parked under the shade of tall trees, its gleaming surface now a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Lydia, Mark's mistress, was beside him. The tension in the air was palpable. Sophia, ever the observant one, squeezed my hand for reassurance. Her courage in this whole ordeal had been a constant source of strength for me. I took a deep breath and walked toward Mark, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Mark," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I've come to get the car back and the money you stole." Mark looked disheveled and worn, a stark contrast to the confident image he had always projected. His eyes darted nervously between Sophia and me. "Nina, please, let's just talk," he said, his voice lacking the authority it once had. Lydia, standing beside him with an air of indifference, crossed her arms and watched the exchange with an almost casual disdain. "You don't need to be so confrontational, Nina," she said with a smirk. "Mark's left you, and you should just accept it." I could barely contain my anger. "Accept it?" I shot back. "You have no idea what it's like to be left in the lurch, burdened with debt and stolen money. And you, Lydia, are you really that smug?" Sophia, despite her young age, decided to step in. "Why did you leave us, Dad?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with hurt. "Why did you take everything and leave Mom in such a bad situation?" Mark seemed taken aback by Sophia's directness. "Sophia, honey, it's complicated," he stammered, trying to avoid her gaze. "I made mistakes, and I'm sorry for that." Lydia, clearly feeling defensive, interjected. "Mark left because he was unhappy. And I'm here now. He chose me because I'm better for him." Sophia's eyes narrowed. "Better? You mean to tell me you're okay with what he did to us? Leaving us without a penny and taking our car?" The confrontation was heating up. Mark's face grew red, and he turned to Lydia, his frustration evident. "Lydia, this isn't helping," he said, his voice rising. "I made mistakes, but I didn't expect things to spiral out of control like this." At that moment, I revealed the card I had up my sleeve. I had already contacted Lydia's parents, hoping they would provide some accountability. They arrived at the scene, visibly angry and disapproving. Lydia's mother and father marched up to their daughter, their faces flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Lydia," her mother exclaimed, her voice cracking with disappointment. "How could you be involved in something like this? Look at the mess you've caused." Lydia's father added, "Mark, we trusted you. We thought you were a decent man. How could you do this?" The public shaming seemed to get under Mark's skin. The atmosphere was charged, and it became clear that Mark was feeling the full weight of his actions. Lydia's parents demanded explanations, and Mark, clearly rattled, started to falter under their scrutiny. Just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get any more chaotic, the turning point arrived. Mark received a phone call that would shift the dynamics of the encounter. Lydia's pregnancy had been a topic of gossip, but now it was about to become central to the confrontation. Mark's face turned ashen as he listened to the caller. He turned to Lydia, his voice trembling. "The baby is not mine, is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lydia's face fell. The truth about the pregnancy, which had been a source of tension and speculation, was now out in the open. Lydia's face turned pale as she struggled to respond. "Mark, I didn't mean for it to come out like this," she stammered. The realization hit Mark like a freight train. The child Lydia was carrying wasn't his, and the timeline didn't match up with their relationship. It was clear that Mark had been deceived, and the magnitude of his betrayal began to sink in. His face twisted in shock and anger, and he started to confront Lydia about the lies. "You lied to me about everything," Mark said, his voice breaking. "How could you?" The argument escalated quickly, with accusations flying in every direction. Lydia's parents were now fully involved, demanding answers and making it clear that they were ashamed of their daughter's actions. Mark and Lydia's argument grew louder, drawing the attention of parkgoers who were now witnessing the public unraveling of their lives. As the confrontation reached its peak, police officers arrived at the scene, summoned by the commotion. They began to question everyone involved. It was clear that this was no longer just a family dispute. It had become a matter of legal concern. In the chaos, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Mark and Lydia's fate was now in the hands of the authorities. The stolen car and the missing money were not just personal grievances anymore. They were legal issues that needed to be resolved. I knew this was only the beginning of a long road ahead. Sophia, though shaken, stood by my side. Her bravery and determination had been a beacon of strength throughout this ordeal. As we prepared to face whatever came next, I knew that the journey was far from over. But at that moment, amidst the confusion and upheaval, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The first step toward reclaiming our lives had been taken. The aftermath of the confrontation at the park was both chaotic and revealing. With Mark and Lydia in police custody, Sophia and I found ourselves in the midst of a whirlwind of legal and emotional turmoil. The park, once a place of serenity, had become a symbol of our shattered lives. In the following days, I busied myself with filing reports for the stolen luxury car and the missing money. The police were efficient, but the process was grueling. Every detail had to be documented, every piece of evidence presented. I felt overwhelmed but knew that we had to move forward, for Sophia's sake and mine. Mark's legal troubles were extensive. The theft of the car and the money had serious repercussions. Lydia's betrayal, coupled with the revelation of her pregnancy, compounded the mess. Mark was charged with theft and fraud, and the legal system began to take its course. I had to prepare myself for a courtroom battle that I had never imagined I would face. Sophia, despite her age, showed remarkable resilience. She took on more responsibilities at home, helping with chores and staying on top of her schoolwork. Her maturity in handling the situation was a constant source of inspiration for me. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, her calm and composed demeanor reminded me of why we had to fight through this. One afternoon, as I was sorting through paperwork related to the case, the phone rang. It was my lawyer with news that Mark had reached out, asking for a settlement. He was willing to return the stolen car and some of the money. The offer, though a relief, was a reminder of the complications ahead. Mark's attempt to make amends was a small step, but didn't erase the emotional and financial damage he had caused. Sophia and I discussed the offer. She was cautious but hopeful. "Mom, do you think it's enough?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. "I don't know, honey," I admitted. "But it's a start. We have to see this through." The day of the court hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Mark and Lydia were present, their faces a mix of shame and defiance. As the proceedings began, I felt a wave of anxiety, but also a sense of determination. The truth of what had happened was laid bare, and the courtroom was filled with the raw emotions of everyone involved. Mark was ordered to pay $25,000 in damages and $600 per month in child support for Sophia. The court also ruled that the stolen car should be returned to me, and I could use the proceeds from its sale to help clear the auto loan. The judgment felt like a small victory, but it was bittersweet. The financial relief was significant, but the emotional scars were still fresh. As I left the courthouse, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The legal battle was over, but the journey to rebuild our lives was just beginning. Sophia and I had to focus on healing and moving forward. In the days that followed, I sold the luxury car to settle the remaining debt. The process was straightforward, but it symbolized the end of a chapter and the beginning of a new one. I also focused on regaining my health, which had suffered during this ordeal. The stress and strain had taken a toll, but with Sophia's support and the resolution of our legal issues, I felt a renewed sense of hope. Sophia continued to excel in her studies and helped out around the house. Her resilience had been a guiding light throughout this challenging period. We slowly began to rebuild our lives, taking each day as it came. The support from friends and family also played a crucial role in our recovery. As we looked ahead, we knew that the scars of the past would remain, but we were determined to build a brighter future. The strength of our bond and our ability to face adversity together gave us the courage to move forward. The road to healing was long, but with each step, we grew stronger. In the end, it was clear that betrayal had tested us, but our resilience and the strength of our family had seen us through. The journey had been arduous, but Sophia and I emerged from it with a renewed sense of purpose and a commitment to creating a new, hopeful chapter in our lives. The months following the court case were filled with a mix of healing and rebuilding. Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the echoes of our past troubles were never far from our minds. Sophia and I continued to adjust to our new reality, finding strength in our bond and in the support we received from those around us. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sophia joined me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, do you ever think about what we've been through?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, seeing the mature young woman she was becoming. "Yes, Sophia, I think about it often," I replied. "But I also think about how far we've come. We faced a lot, but we faced it together." Sophia nodded. "It's strange to think that things could have been so different. But I'm glad we have each other." Her words were a reminder of how important our relationship had become through this ordeal. Despite everything, we had grown closer and learned to appreciate each other more deeply. In the weeks that followed, I focused on my recovery and on making our home a place of comfort and stability. The sale of the luxury car had cleared the remaining debt, and I was able to breathe a little easier financially. My health improved as I dedicated time to self-care and rebuilding my strength. Sophia's academic success continued to shine. She excelled in her studies, and her teachers praised her resilience and dedication. I was incredibly proud of her achievements, which seemed even more remarkable given the challenges she had faced. Her hard work and perseverance were a testament to her character. We started to make new plans for the future. With the debt cleared and a renewed sense of stability, I began considering how to create a positive and fulfilling life for us. We took small steps towards this new beginning, focusing on activities that brought us joy and relaxation. Weekend outings, family movie nights, and even a small vacation helped us rediscover the simple pleasures of life. One day, I received a letter from Mark's lawyer. It was a formal notice that Mark had fulfilled his financial obligations. The $600 monthly payments were set up, and while it wasn't a cure-all, it was a step towards ensuring Sophia's well-being. As I read the letter, I felt a sense of closure. The legal battles were behind us, and we could now focus on what truly mattered, our happiness and future. I shared the news with Sophia, who smiled with relief and contentment. In the end, our journey had been one of incredible hardship, but it was also one of growth and resilience. We had faced betrayal and adversity, but we had emerged stronger, with a renewed appreciation for the strength of our family bond. The support we received from friends, the legal resolution, and the commitment to rebuilding our lives had all contributed to our recovery. Sophia and I looked forward to the future with hope and optimism. The scars of the past would always be a part of us, but they no longer defined us. We were ready to embrace new opportunities and to continue building a life filled with love, trust, and joy. As we moved forward, we knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we had the strength to face them together. Our journey had taught us the importance of resilience, honesty, and the unwavering support of family. And with that knowledge, we stepped confidently into the future, ready to create new memories and to build a brighter, more hopeful life. Since childhood, Stuart had been a spoiled boy. His father owned several car dealerships and never denied him anything. Mr. Hamilton hoped the business would eventually pass on to his dreamy son, but Stuart was interested in something entirely different. He loved to draw and play the guitar, dreaming of becoming a well-known artist or musician. Years went by, and he still enthusiastically told his father about concerts, his favorite bands, and new exhibitions at the gallery. "Stuart, have you ever thought about getting married?" his father asked one day, hoping to rationalize his 30-year-old son and set him on the path of a businessman. "I haven't thought about it." "Why?" Stuart replied carelessly. "I have a business partner with a wonderful daughter who knows how to handle business. She came to the meeting several times in place of her father and took over," his father suggested. "Are you insinuating that it's time for me to do adult things at your car dealership again?" The guy grimaced. He didn't like the whole idea. They already had a good fortune. Why should he get involved in his father's business and reject the idea of his band? Moreover, things were just beginning to go uphill. Stuart had found the whole band, and they wanted to get together for their first rehearsal soon. "No, do what you want," his father reacted calmly and unexpectedly. "I have another plan. Marry Laura, and it will unite the companies." "Are you kidding me?" Stuart's jaw dropped in amazement. "Son," Mr. Hamilton replied calmly, "I see that you are not interested in business, and I am tired and getting old, but I don't want to give up my business. Let my partner develop it. Marriage is necessary so that our half is behind you. Laura will be doing everything, and if you have children, the business will pass on to them later. Think about it, son. It's a good idea." With these words, the 60-year-old Mr. Hamilton got up from his armchair and left his son's apartment, leaving him to digest such a proposal. Stuart was confused. On the one hand, he understood his father's position. All his life, he had felt like a disappointment to his father. Stuart couldn't comprehend all the workings of the car dealership, such as what services to offer and at what prices to avoid financial collapse and lack of consumers. He was not familiar with concepts like indexing or other terms that casually passed through his father's speech. But Laura was familiar with them. According to his father, Laura could save the business and even develop it, and they wouldn't lose anything because they would enter into marriage. But there was another side to the question. Stuart felt like a simple object, a means of payment for a transaction, and he didn't like it at all. Could his father sell him for the business? Meanwhile, Mr. Hamilton was driving around the evening city. He decided to leave his son alone so that no one would interfere with his decision-making. The man understood that this was a critical step in his son's life, and unfortunately, he never learned how to make decisions. But how would Stuart live on in this cruel world? Mr. Hamilton loved his son and wanted the best future for him. When the businessman met Laura, he realized that this strict girl could make his son a real man who knows exactly what he needs and how to achieve it. Unfortunately, by the age of 30, Stuart never learned this important quality. If he left the business to Stuart, he would abandon it and spend all the money on entertainment. The amount was not small, of course, but the world is huge. Mr. Hamilton's hand lowered the window, and he lit a cigarette. He rarely smoked, trying to keep his health, but his heart was uneasy for his son. The next day, Stuart called his father. He had almost not slept at night, thinking about what decision to make. His head still buzzed with thoughts. He thought about his future and what this marriage could give him. His father had said that the girl was pretty, and it was unlikely that he would cheat. But on the other hand, Stuart felt like a changeable coin. "Hello," his father's voice came from the receiver. "Dad, hi." Stuart coughed. "I've been thinking about your words. And well, I can't just make an offer at the first meeting like that. I haven't even seen her once." The son shouted in despair. Mr. Hamilton sighed heavily. "Don't worry about it. I'll talk to my partner. If you agree, he will explain everything to his daughter. No one will force you." Well, if that's the case, Stuart's heart beat so hard as if he were called to the board for the first time in school, and he didn't learn the material. If so, Dad, then okay. I'll do as you said. Excellent decision, son. Approval was heard in his father's voice. Stuart took it as the highest compliment. They said goodbye, and Stuart began to get ready for his first rehearsal with his new band. Several days had passed, and Mr. Hamilton was negotiating with his partner. The deal was profitable, so Mr. Beckman agreed to talk to his daughter. Laura immediately understood what a good offer it was and gave a positive answer. She was not interested in her future husband. He was more like a business partner. If necessary, she would buy out his share and divorce. Mr. Hamilton did care about his son, of course, but if Stuart turned out to be a burden, Laura would not carry him on her shoulders. And judging by the fact that his son at 30 years old did not participate in his father's business, it seemed to be the case. However, this did not scare Laura. At only 24 years old, she had her whole life ahead of her and could afford to spend some time on love games with benefits in the future. In some ways, it all reminded her of investing. She was already familiar with these matters. In the evening, Mr. Hamilton dropped by to see his son. They enjoyed dinner while discussing the situation. "We are concluding a merger deal," Mr. Hamilton announced importantly. "I talked to my partner, and his daughter, Laura, understood the situation and agreed to the marriage. Your acquaintance is scheduled for tomorrow, so try to make a good impression." Stuart frowned. "It's strange, Father. I feel like an instrument." "We've already discussed this," Mr. Hamilton said. "Yes, I know, and I understand why you took the step, but I don't want to tie my life to someone I don't love. In our time, marriages for calculation are much more common than you think," Mr. Hamilton stated. "And I understand that. Do you think I haven't thought this over?" "I may not understand your business, but I'm not a complete idiot," Stuart retorted. "No one says you are an idiot. If you can't get along after the meeting, we agreed to cancel the deal. So nothing will change in your life if you don't want it to," Mr. Hamilton said. These words made Stuart believe that his father was not treating him like a tool for the deal. He still gave him a choice, even if that choice could ruin his business. Such a gesture touched Stuart, and he decided to look for any positive trait in Laura that he could hold on to. Stuart couldn't fall asleep at night. His father had said that the girl would be waiting for him in the restaurant at table 17, but he never showed him the photo. Is she really that ugly? By morning, Stuart hadn't imagined a bleak future for himself and even thought of not going to the restaurant. But he remembered that his father had given him a chance to refuse. "I'll go for my dad's sake," decided Stuart, and he went to the meeting. Approaching the hostess, Stuart asked, "Hello, I have table number 17 reserved. Could you please show me to it?" "Yes, of course," the woman behind the counter smiled warmly. Gloomy thoughts still plagued Stuart until he finally saw Laura. She turned out to be a petite girl with cute red curls. However, her face was quite stern, and her glasses gave her an air of seriousness. She was sitting with a laptop and drinking lemonade with ice. "Hi," the guy greeted her. "You're Laura, aren't you?" The girl looked at him over her glasses. "Hi, yes. And you're Stuart, I guess." She reached out her hand. "Yes." Stuart lightly touched her fingers with his lips. "Oh, you are a gentleman," the girl smiled. "Sit down. Let's choose some food." "I haven't even had breakfast yet." "What have you been up to?" the guy asked. He liked Laura, and in fact, he even felt that she was already in love, a little. "Business," the girl shrugged. "I want pasta and salad," she decided quickly. "And Stuart scanned the menu with his eyes. "Try the same thing," the girl suggested. The guy agreed, not even realizing that cunning Laura was testing his resolve. Her test did not disappoint her. She was ready for the fact that Stuart was not the most decisive person in the world, although perhaps it was still too early to conclude. By the end of their first meeting, Laura had a clear opinion of Stuart. Although he was a fairly pleasant conversationalist, he was an extremely unserious person. She could not rely on him in the long term. Laura had already decided that she would buy out his share and get a divorce in a couple of years, but for now, The deal seemed profitable. However, Stuart was head over heels in love. The girl's sternness did not discourage him at all. On the contrary, her curls shimmered so beautifully in the rays of the setting sun, and how much she knew. Stuart felt a little ashamed of himself and his creative nature. "I have a question for you," said Stuart, as they went to the park to chat a little more. "Okay," said the girl, and she smiled. "How can such an attractive girl still be without a crowd of suitors?" asked Stuart. Laura looked at him strangely. "Stuart, listen," the girl said, as she sat down on the bench. "Our marriage will be a calculated one. You don't need to pretend to be in love or make any compliments." But Stuart felt like he had just been hit by a cold shower. "But I'm not pretending anything." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yes, I like you." Stuart sat down next to the girl and took her delicate hand in his. "I hope I didn't leave you indifferent either." Something stirred in Laura's chest. She didn't want to offend or hurt this guy. He seemed to have fallen in love. Laura couldn't lie so blatantly about her feelings, so she could only pursue her lips. "I see." Stuart withdrew his hands and sighed heavily. "Can you tell me why?" "Well," the girl sighed too. "You seem to me indecisive." "You know, it's not so bad. A soft character is much better than mine, prickly." Stuart became visibly upset, and Laura felt sorry for him. "Listen, I agreed to get married if you do too." "I think I can change my mind," Laura said. "As soon as I saw you, I decided to get married," Stuart unexpectedly replied. "Here," Laura smiled. "That was a firm decision." "Well, I have to go home. I'd like to review the quarterly financial reports." "Laura, you know," Stuart suddenly said, "a man cannot only run a business. Come to my first concert. I have my band. Maybe you'll like it." "I don't even know," the girl answered doubtfully. "I don't like noisy gatherings. Did you want to have a wedding in silence?" Stuart grinned slyly. Laura smiled. "You got me." "Okay, I'll come. Text me the address of the club." "Of course." They said goodbye. Stuart was only thinking about how to impress Laura. He wasn't going to give up and was determined to win the girl over. But Laura had strange feelings. Almost for the first time in her life, she was completely lost. After all, Stuart seemed so soft to her, and as they said goodbye, he changed before her eyes. Did her impression of him turn out to be deceptive? Stuart rehearsed with his band for a whole month. He was determined to impress Laura, to make her see a strong and decisive man in him. He may not be a business shark, but he is strong in something else. The guy found a club with live music that provided platforms for aspiring musicians to perform. Of course, it was for free, but Stuart himself was ready to pay just to have a place to perform. In addition, he thought that after a few successful performances, they could move up to the next level, namely selling tickets to their show. And thus, he too would become a businessman, but he would still be in the field he likes. In short, Stuart was up to his ears in business and fully immersed himself in it. One evening, Stuart's worried father came to visit him. "Thank God, you're okay," exclaimed Mr. Hamilton as he entered. "Why wouldn't I be okay?" Stuart wondered. "Are you kidding me, Grandma?" His father, "Your phone has been unreachable for a week. You haven't logged into social media. What are you even doing?" "Oh, that," the son rubbed his forehead. "It's probably dead. Don't worry about me. I'm just rehearsing a lot right now. I want to give my first concert." "You should have told me about it earlier," said his father. "Okay, I see that you're fine. If you need anything, call me, but don't disappear like that again." "Okay, I'll try my best, but lovers don't watch the clock," Stuart grinned. "Are you in love?" "With whom?" Mr. Hamilton's eyes widened. "Laura, who else?" Stuart replied. The father breathed a sigh of relief. "I thought there were so many girls out there." No, I only need her," Stuart firmly declared. Hamilton was surprised by the changes that had taken place in his son this month. Stuart had grown up. He became more serious, though his father considered his music a simple hobby. Progress was visible. Stuart had determined to charm Laura and was doing everything in his power to do so. His behavior pleased his father. It was a manifestation of decisiveness, which Stuart had always lacked. The day of the concert arrived. Stuart sent an invitation to Laura, and she said she would come at the very beginning. This pleased the guy greatly, and he went to the concert with great excitement. The draw decided that his group would perform first, and Stuart started to find Laura in the crowd. And then he saw her. The fragile girl felt improper but didn't show it. Laura was sitting at a table on the second floor, which offered a beautiful view of the stage. Stuart wanted to go to the dance floor and have a good time. However, he didn't dare to ask her to do so, as Laura was already quite tense. He decided to let her get used to such places first, and then let her dance. The band tuned their instruments and took the stage. Laura smiled immediately at Stuart, who also smiled. He greeted the audience and then turned directly to Laura, thanking her for coming to the concert and giving him a chance. The boys had rehearsed a lot, so the performance went great, and Stuart hurried to Laura. However, an unpleasant surprise awaited him. Some drunk man was standing at the girls' table. Laura didn't want to talk to him and was pressing herself into her chair. "Hey," Stuart shouted. "Any problems?" Laura gratefully looked at him. "What problems?" "I'm just getting to know this girl." The drunkard barely spoke. "Go away. This is my girl. Or do you want to sort it out outside?" Blood was pounding in Stuart's ears. He was clenching his fists, preparing for the fight. This was the first serious fight in his life. He had fought with someone else in school once, but was usually a very calm guy who never got into trouble. And now he was about to fight for Laura. No, I'm leaving." "No problems." The man held his hands up and stumbled away. "Wow, I didn't think you were a chivalry," smiled Laura. "It's not chivalry. Anyone would have done the same," Stuart shrugged. He didn't want to tell her that this could have been his first and last fight. "But not my ex." Interest in Laura's eyes changed a lot during this time. "Is that good or bad?" "It's good." The girl smiled and moved closer to Stuart with small steps. Over the next few months, Stuart achieved his goal of winning Laura's heart. He took her to the movies and restaurants, and even found a car museum that amused her. Stuart wanted to show her that their interests could be shared, and he gradually became interested in the car business. The documents for the merger of the companies were ready, but Stuart kept delaying the marriage. He wanted to do everything out of love, not calculation. Mr. Hamilton did not rush his son, especially since he saw that Stuart was not going to change his decision. The guy recorded several songs for his band, and his performances became paid. Of course, it didn't bring in millions yet, but the ambitious guy believed that everything was ahead. Besides, Stuart began to understand the intricacies of the car business, not without his father's help, of course. But now, Mr. Hamilton was confident about the future of his business and his son. Laura saw all the changes happening to Stuart and could not believe her eyes. In just a few months, the boy turned into a real man. Once, Stuart invited Laura to an expensive restaurant. Romantic music, dim light, her favorite Italian cuisine. The guy had thought everything through. When Laura got out of the taxi, he was ready for his main battle. "I know my words won't be a surprise to you," he began. "But you have turned me into another person. I wanted to change for you so that you could be with me and not feel obliged to tolerate me all your life. I want everything to be different from what it seemed at the very beginning. I want us to get married for love." Stuart got down on one knee and opened the ring box. "Will you marry me?" Laura laughed happily and immediately hugged her fiancé. "Of course, Stuart. Of course, I agree." 2 months later, they got married. The parents of the newlyweds could not be happier. They had thought that their children were unlikely to love each other and would probably not agree to a wedding. But Stuart and Laura looked happy, and smiles did not leave their faces throughout the holiday. Together they began to manage their parents' businesses, and Laura was surprised that Stuart was just as good at understanding all the intricacies. Stuart chose to leave his band as a hobby and plunged fully into the world of cars. Thanks to his creative nature, he was full of ideas, and practical Laura chose the best of them. The couple formed the perfect tandem in the world of the car business. A year after the wedding, Laura excitedly told Stuart that they were expecting twins. Stuart was overjoyed and immediately told his father that it was time for him to prepare to babysit his grandchildren, which he planned to do in retirement. The couple had a boy and a girl. As the children grew up, Laura and Stuart only loved each other more. They were happy that a marriage of calculation turned into a marriage of love.
I never expected you to hoard money like that. After all, we're a married couple. There's no reason I shouldn't use our shared assets. It's even worse to hide it while looking down on me. My husband and mother-in-law, Mrs. Hawthorne, continued to talk as they pleased, and I grew increasingly disgusted with them. Finally, I decided to confront them with reality. By the way, have you checked the name on the passbook? I interjected, exasperated. My name is Lillian, and I'm turning 42 this year. I've been married for 17 years. Before that, I worked at a company. After getting married, I quit my job and started working part-time at a local supermarket. I met my husband Easton at work, and at the time, I thought he was an ordinary and kind man. That perception changed about 6 months into our marriage. One day, while I was preparing dinner, Mrs. Hawthorne suddenly visited our house without any notice. My husband hadn't come home from work yet, and I thought there might be some urgent matters, so I let her in. As soon as she saw the living room, she let out a big sigh. Lillian, you've been idly watching TV until this hour. My son Easton is still working hard, sweating at his job. Don't you feel sorry? She scolded. Yes, I did have the TV on, but until a moment ago I had been preparing dinner in the kitchen. You might say I'm lazing around, but I finished my housework in the morning and just returned from shopping after my part-time job, I replied, irritated but trying to maintain composure. She ostentatiously snorted, went into the kitchen, and started finding fault with dinner. Oh dear, is this all we have for dinner today? Poor Easton working so hard. I've planned for curry and salad today. The salad is in the fridge. How could you let Easton eat such a half-baked meal? I wonder what you've learned at home, she insulted, not just targeting me but also my parents. Finally losing my patience, I asked a bit harshly, Didn't you need something? My Mrs. Hawthorne opened her eyes wide in faux innocence. Oh my, don't get so mad just because I looked at dinner. What do you need? Withered vegetables to her son and herself. At that moment, I realized she just wanted to bully me and persistently criticized me. I consulted my father-in-law about the difficulty of preparing meals for Mrs. Hawthorne and the problem of her frequent unannounced visits. He seemed unaware and politely apologized. I thought she was going out to dinner with friends. I didn't realize she was bothering you, Lillian. I'm sorry, he said. It's not something for you to apologize for. I've been giving her money for meals, assuming she was dining out, but she hasn't been taking it, I replied. Unfortunately, no. I'm sorry. My father-in-law apologized repeatedly. He promised to speak sternly to my Mrs. Hawthorne, and I thought that would be enough. But then I received a phone call filled with scathing remarks from Mrs. Hawthorne. Hello? You're ungrateful talking to my husband like that. I've been going out of my way to check on you, and I didn't expect you to repay my kindness with such ingratitude, she said. That's not true. I'm not repaying kindness with ingratitude. You should be the one apologizing. It's audacious to claim you're educating me in areas where my upbringing was lacking. You should be grateful, my Mrs. Hawthorne asserted. I understand what you're saying, but it is inconvenient when you show up without notice. Shouldn't a mother need to make an appointment to visit her own son's house? My parents wouldn't do that, I countered. How brazen you are as a daughter-in-law. You should adapt to the rules of your husband's family no matter what, she retorted, growing increasingly heated until she was yelling so loud I couldn't understand her, and then she hung up. I suspected she called during my father-in-law's absence, so I hesitated to consult him again, fearing more of the same. Despite a slight decrease in frequency, Mrs. Hawthorne persisted in visiting our home. My husband, finding solace in complaining about work to her and receiving her sympathy, showed no signs of persuading her to stop the visits anytime soon. Witnessing his attitude, Mrs. Hawthorne became even more cheerful, and they both began to blame me. Lillian, you don't show enough respect to Mom, my husband chimed in. That's right, Easton. Tell her more. I'm only getting a small allowance even though I'm the one earning the money. My Mrs. Hawthorne, They continued to eat the meals I prepared while complaining about them, chatting and laughing in the living room I had just cleaned. When washing the dishes, my husband would demand, "At least prepare the bath," expecting me to get everything ready from bath towels to his pajamas. My Mrs. Hawthorne didn't reprimand him, but instead sided with him, saying, "Poor thing, having such an inconsiderate wife." I consulted with my father-in-law again, receiving yet another profuse apology, but I was exhausted by the fact that Mrs. Hawthorne's actions remained unchanged. Days passed in the same manner until one day I noticed that a necklace handed down to me by my mother was missing. When I asked my husband, he claimed he didn't know and coldly dismissed me with, "You probably lost—" "That's right, Easton. Lillian is terrible," Mrs. Hawthorne chimed in. "I just wanted to get along. No, listen. The necklace your mother is wearing is the one I said I lost. I don't want to hear any excuses," I pleaded. "Mom, let's eat out tonight. You better reflect on your actions," my husband declared. Pulling my Mrs. Hawthorne away, she remarked, "Such a sweet boy, Easton is a good son," leaving with my husband. The shock of not being able to retrieve my necklace, along with the anger towards my husband for siding with Mrs. Hawthorne without even listening to me, made my pent-up frustrations explode. That same day, I decided to take revenge. Once again, I talked with my father-in-law. While he apologized to me, he listened attentively to my story. I discovered that he was also fed up with Mrs. Hawthorne's outrageous behavior. During this conversation, I decided to devise a plan. When Mrs. Hawthorne, as usual, came to our house without learning her lesson, flaunting the necklace and enjoying my reaction, I deliberately told her, "I forgot to buy something. Could you look after the house for a bit?" Normally, she would have retorted with something scathing, but this time she smiled sweetly and agreed, saying, "Of course. Why don't you take your time? You're always busy with housework. Thank you." Leaving Mrs. Hawthorne at home, I went out alone to the supermarket, heart pounding, testing the malice of those close to me. If I could get definitive evidence, I could take my revenge. Yet part of me also hoped that Mrs. Hawthorne and her husband would reflect on their actions and change. Exactly 30 minutes later, I returned home with shopping bags. What greeted me was my Mrs. Hawthorne in the living room, messily eating dinner with my husband. "Oh, you were late, so we started without you. Today's dinner was more plain than usual. Don't be sorry for Mom," my husband remarked. "But I asked Mrs. Hawthorne to watch the house because I forgot to buy something," I interjected. "No more excuses. Be careful next time," my husband retorted, acting even more arrogant because of Mrs. Hawthorne's presence. I couldn't help but sigh. Looking at the pot with only bits of vegetables left, I felt more disgusted than angry at my husband, who didn't even think to leave some food for me. I realized there was likely no future where these two would reflect on their actions. After cleaning up dinner, I checked what happened to the trap. As expected, it seemed like the trap had been set off. Seeing it, my husband smirked, mocking me, looking uglier than ever. His triumphant smile resembled Mrs. Hawthorne's when she showed off the necklace. I couldn't help but laugh, realizing that the day of revenge came sooner than I thought. On my husband's day off, both he and Mrs. Hawthorne called me to the living room. Seeing the two of them in high spirits, I sat across from them, pretending to know nothing. "Hey, why didn't you tell us?" my husband began. "What are you talking about?" I feigned innocence. "About the bank book. If you had that much money, you could have told us. Now you can show filial piety to Mom, too," my husband chided. "I don't understand what you're talking about," I replied, maintaining my composure. "Don't play dumb. We're talking about your bank book." My Mrs. Hawthorne interjected. "Oh," managing to compose myself without showing any signs of panic. They happily "Hey, cut it out. You're being rude," Mrs. Hawthorne scolded him. "Who's being rude? It's far more disrespectful for you two to use my money without my permission," I retorted. "People with bad upbringing have bad mouths," my Mrs. Hawthorne snapped back. I struggled to suppress a laugh at the two of them, amazed at how terrible they truly were. I had become hardened, but my resolve to take revenge never wavered, because it was these two who had molded me this way. "We found a perfect newly built property for sale, so we've already signed a contract. No matter what you say, it's too late now. Anyway, I didn't know you were saving up that much. Besides, we're married, so there's no reason for you to complain about using our shared property," my husband declared. That's right. It's worse to hide it, my Mrs. Hawthorne chimed in. By the way, did you check the name on the bank book? I interrupted. The two of them froze at my words. Finally unable to hold back, I burst into laughter. They checked the name on the bank book and then looked at me with faces drained of blood. What the hell is this? It's exactly what you're seeing. Why is it under our person's name? My husband exclaimed. I never said it was my bank book, so what does that mean? You stole Dad's bank book, you thief, I accused. Who's the thief? You went out of your way to pry open a locked drawer and took it, but you were hiding it so carefully, I responded. Oh, so it's okay to steal things that your daughter-in-law doesn't know about. I'll help revise and refine the passage for clarity and correctness. Treasures? I guess that's how you were raised, Mrs. Hawthorne, I retorted. Don't talk back to Mom, you should watch your mouth, my husband interjected. Do you know why father-in-law gave this to me? I questioned. Why? What are you saying? My husband asked. I heard from father-in-law about the reason Mrs. Hawthorne has been spending so much money lately. You two took a vacation while taking time off from work, didn't you? Well, that's it. It seems you told the company whatever you wanted as the reason for taking time off, like I had a fever or went back to my parents' home, I revealed. I received a call from the department head, and he was speechless when I told him the truth. Finally realizing their predicament, the two exchanged troubled glances. But I had no intention of forgiving them over something like this. While we were silent, the door conveniently rang. When I went to the entrance and brought the visitor into the living room, the two let out a small scream. It was my Mrs. Hawthorne who had come to our house unannounced. I contacted my father-in-law. Why are you here? I've told you countless times not to cause trouble for Lylan, he admonished. But there are no buts. When will you two start behaving properly, Dad? I interjected. She had your bank book, my husband blurted out. So what are you calling her she for? My father-in-law retorted. I didn't raise you to be so rude. You're old enough to know better. It's embarrassing to hear you calling Mom Mom all the time. If you can't treasure your wife, what's the point of calling her she? If you say that she has treasured me too, are you saying you're not being treasured? My husband countered. I've been working so as not to cause you trouble, and I thought I'd manage to save a decent amount of money. I've tried my best to give you both financial freedom, allowing you to do as you please. And now you expect me to turn a blind eye to the mistreatment of your wife. Throughout this exchange, whenever they tried to make an excuse, my father-in-law would fire back tenfold until they were rendered speechless. He delivered the final blow to the two who were shrinking and hanging their heads. By the way, about the bank book I left with Lylan, my father-in-law continued. I told her to take it as a nuisance fee because I felt bad about how much trouble you— The two couldn't say anything, and Mrs. Hawthorne ended up being taken home by my father-in-law. Before she left, I pointed at her neck and was able to safely recover the necklace. Seeing this, my husband guessed what had happened and forced his mother to bow her head in the now quiet living room. I handed the divorce papers to my husband, who was completely deflated. Why? What do you mean? Why? He stammered. After all this, you still think we can— Here is a revised version of the passage. Stay married? But you're only mad at Mom. Of course I'm disgusted with you too, I responded. No, I won't divorce, he protested. Then shall we go to court? We'd have to expose everything you've done to the court in your company, though, I countered. Oh yes, we've got it all on camera. You two breaking open the lock and taking the bank book clearly shows you desperately breaking a lock, my father-in-law added. No, you're lying. It's amazing how you can call others thieves after doing such a thing. I wonder what kind of upbringing you had, my husband exclaimed. All of that will be made public, and you'll probably have to cover the $300K you used of your father-in-law's money, my compensation, and the court fees. What are you going to do? I asked calmly. Why can you say such cruel things? You still don't get it. Should we have your father lecture again? My husband replied. I accepted the divorce papers from my dejected husband and finally became a free woman. As for the $300K I received from my father-in-law, I decided to accept it again as a nuisance and consolation fee for my ex-husband and ex-Mrs. Hawthorne. Under my father-in-law's supervision, the two of them had to work tirelessly to repay him a total of 60 million yen. Later, I received an email from my ex-husband to a free email address, seemingly asking for reconciliation, but I ignored and deleted it. Thanks to being free from my source of stress, my health has improved, and I'm spending my time freely with the money I received from my father-in-law. I invite you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and please don't hesitate to share our videos with your friends and family who might enjoy our content too. Thank you once again for being a part of this journey. Your support fuels my passion for creating and sharing content on YouTube.
I received a call that my husband, Jordan, had been in a falling accident. I rushed to the hospital. There, the doctor told me the surgery was successful, but Jordan hadn't regained consciousness. He could wake up soon, or it might take a year or even 10. Hearing this, I collapsed to my knees in despair. The next day, my nephew Alan visited Jordan's hospital room. I hadn't seen him in years. "Auntie, Uncle Jordan left something with me to give to you a while back," he said, handing me a letter. He insisted I read it alone in private. I read the letter, revealing an unbelievable confession from Jordan. To verify his confession, I undressed the unconscious Jordan and found confirmation of the letter's contents. Unbeknownst to me, Jordan's secret was exposed, leading to an unexpected turn of events. Jordan and I got married early among our friends because we clicked so well. It was around the time I started enjoying my work, so I told Jordan I wanted to continue working after marriage. We agreed to support each other. Years have passed, and I think we are still a very close couple. Before turning 30, I wanted children. When I shared this with Jordan, he too expressed a desire to start a family. We then began actively trying to conceive. One day, Jordan's voluntarily institutionalized father, whom we couldn't inconvenience, passed away. We had visited him regularly, and the last visit was just half a month ago. He seemed well then, so his death was sudden and shocking. The loss hit us hard, to the point where we could barely eat. I received a lot of help from my father-in-law during his lifetime. My husband, Jordan, and I married in our early 20s when he wasn't earning much. In the beginning, we were greatly aided by food supplies from my in-laws. Eventually, we started earning enough to raise a child and began thinking about repaying my father-in-law. Just as he decided to move into a facility, my mother-in-law had passed away 2 years earlier. We wanted to repay our debt to my father-in-law since we couldn't do the same for her. So, when my mother-in-law passed first, Jordan and I offered to live with my father-in-law, but he didn't want to trouble us, a young couple, and chose to live in a facility managed with his savings. When he moved into the facility, he sold the family home and land. The funds from this sale were likely used for his stay at the facility. He once mentioned wanting to give a living inheritance to Jordan, saying he had more money than he needed for his remaining years. Jordan, not wanting to worry about it, told him to spend it freely and declined the inheritance. Who could have imagined that after my mother-in-law's death, my father-in-law would leave us so soon? Jordan regretted not insisting on living together and not being able to repay his father's kindness, but we couldn't mourn forever. The nightmare of my mother-in-law's death was about to recur. Jordan has an older sister who is somewhat problematic, and I've hardly met her. When my mother-in-law died, she was only concerned about the inheritance, ignoring my grieving father-in-law and us. Even before the funeral, she demanded her share of the inheritance in a commanding tone. Eventually, to silence his demanding daughter, my father-in-law gave her what he called severance money, under the condition that she never show her face to him again. We took this as an effective disownment. Since then, she hasn't appeared before my father-in-law. She wants to see him but can't, as he hasn't shared his whereabouts. Jordan and I hadn't been informed about the sale of his parents' house, so it seemed like his sister hadn't visited there either. Therefore, she likely didn't know that the house and land had already been sold. Knowing her, she might demand a share of the sale proceeds once she finds out. We could keep my father-in-law's death a secret, but dealing with her complaints later would be unpleasant. So, we decided to contact her and distribute everything equally to avoid future troubles. The problem was the will. My father-in-law was very concerned about her actions after his death. He said he needed to leave a clear will to prevent her from acting rashly. He planned to meet with a lawyer, which I heard about half a month ago during our last meeting, but he passed away before that could happen. Jordan had to talk to her, so he called her mobile. Not sure if she'd answer. After a long ring, she picked up. Jordan skipped the greetings and went straight to the point, telling her about my father-in-law's death, the funeral arrangements, and then the inheritance. But as time passed, Jordan became increasingly irritated. Jordan's sister had a loud voice, and I could hear her through the phone. She said she couldn't attend the funeral, but demanded her share of the inheritance. There was no word of mourning for my father-in-law. Despite his frustration, Jordan tried to remain calm while talking to her, but it seemed like she overpowered the conversation. After hanging up, Jordan was visibly upset and shared that she had divorced and that we would discuss the inheritance distribution after the funeral. Jordan was particularly concerned about his nephew, her son. She mentioned her divorce, but there was no talk of how or where her son was doing. Every attempt to bring him up was overshadowed by the inheritance issue. Jordan thought it was better she didn't come to the funeral to avoid a repeat of what happened at my mother-in-law's funeral. I agreed to stay silent if that's what he preferred. We were so busy with the aftermath of the funeral and other procedures. During this time, she kept calling almost daily about the inheritance. Initially, Jordan explained patiently, but gradually he began to ignore her calls, just responding nonchalantly. Fed up with her constant calls, Jordan decided to meet her. She suddenly became very cheerful about the progression of things. Hearing this, I felt uneasy and wanted to accompany him, but he insisted on meeting her alone. For the past 2 years, I've been helping with all the procedures and arrangements following the deaths of Jordan's parents. He felt it wouldn't be right to involve me further in dealing with his sister and the inheritance distribution. He assured me he'd handle it well and asked me not to worry. So, trusting his words, I decided to wait and see how things would unfold. I had initially planned to join him regardless, but a sudden surge in work at my company made it impossible for me to match his schedule. So, Jordan ended up going to meet her alone as planned. That day was incredibly busy at work, with everyone silently focusing on their tasks. During my break, I couldn't help but worry about Jordan. I tried to switch back to work mode, believing no news meant things were going smoothly. Then suddenly, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the hospital's name appeared on the screen. Modern phones display the sender's name even if the number isn't saved, especially if it's from an important institution. Jordan and I are both proud of our health, with hardly any hospital visits in our history. The hospital that called was the one my mother-in-law had frequented years before her death, but I couldn't imagine why they'd contact me now. After hesitating, I answered the call. The nurse introduced herself and confirmed the hospital's name. After hearing Jordan's name, she asked if I was his wife. Upon confirming, I was told that Jordan had been urgently brought to the hospital. They needed me to come quickly. So, I explained the situation to my boss and left work early. Upon arriving, Jordan was still undergoing treatment. A nurse hurriedly explained his condition, saying he needed emergency surgery. I was asked to consent and sign various documents, which left me feeling overwhelmed and blank. The nurse, seeing me in such a state, sternly yet kindly said, "You need to pull yourself together. Your husband is fighting to live." Her words woke me up. Jordan was fighting, and the doctors were working hard to save him. I slapped my cheek slightly to regain composure and followed the nurse's instructions, signing the necessary documents. With the doctor's efforts, they said there was a high chance Jordan would regain consciousness, which brought a slight relief, though I remained vigilant as I arranged the essentials for his hospital stay and contacted various people. It wasn't until late at night that I could finally sit beside him, feeling the warmth of his hand. I was overwhelmed with relief that he was alive. Tears naturally flowed, but since it was just us in the room, I let them be, holding his hand tightly. I kept talking to him, hoping for his consciousness to return, but he remained unresponsive throughout the night. A nurse suggested I take a rest, but I refused to leave his side. Taking pride in my physical resilience, around noon, Jordan's sister unexpectedly appeared in the room. This was the first time I'd seen her since my mother-in-law's funeral. We exchanged a brief nod, but internally I wondered why she was here. I had informed a few relatives and work colleagues about Jordan's situation, but she wasn't among them. Considering the issues at my mother-in-law's funeral, I knew no other relatives were in touch with her either. In essence, she was practically ostracized by the family and our father-in-law. Why was she here? Pondering alone was a waste of time. I asked her how she knew about this hospital. It's common to hear stories about someone spotting a known person at a hospital, but I hadn't stepped out of Jordan's room. She couldn't have seen me anywhere else in the hospital. Does it even matter what's going on with him? Is he brain dead? Does it look like he'll make it, huh? Her assumption of brain death, based on his unconscious state, seemed insensitive. Wouldn't a normal reaction be to inquire about his safety or chances of recovery? She seemed to have already written off any hope of his recovery. So he hasn't regained consciousness. Guess he doesn't have long then. You know, since I made the effort to come here, you should at least cover my travel and meal expenses. Her attitude was infuriating. I had not invited her, and yet she dared to demand compensation for her unasked visit. Struggling to keep my irritation from showing, I reminded myself that we were in a hospital, surrounded by other patients and close to the nurse's station. The last thing I wanted was to cause a scene in front of Jordan. I took out a bit more money than necessary from my wallet and handed it to her, anticipating her potential dissatisfaction with a lesser amount. I didn't want any further conversation with her at this moment. Seemingly satisfied with the amount, she left the room with a light step, mentioning she was going to eat. But just as she left, she stopped and called the child into the room. "You know who this is, right? My son, your nephew. I'm going to eat, so look after him for me," she commanded in an imposing tone and quickly walked away from the hospital room. Her heels clicked sharply on the floor. She moved so swiftly that I didn't even have a chance to say anything to her. The boy left behind seemed hesitant at first, but then approached me with a determined look. "Hi, I have something Uncle asked me to give you." "You?" It appeared he was referring to Jordan. He gestured that he wanted to speak privately, so I crouched to his level. He took something out of his pocket and handed it to me. "Uncle said to give this to you without Mom knowing. He said if I do well, I might be able to live with Dad." I did it right, didn't I? I patted his head a few times, reassuring him that he had done well. The item he handed me was a letter from Jordan. It wasn't a formal letter, but rather a piece of paper torn from a notebook. I hurriedly read the letter. Jordan and his sister were initially supposed to meet at a cafe. However, on the day of their meeting, she suddenly called him to her house instead. Jordan wrote that he suspected something was amiss and decided to document the events while watching for an opportunity. He mentioned a mysterious injury he had sustained around the time of his mother's death, which was news to me. He probably treated it himself without my knowledge. The letter made me wonder why he was bringing this up now. As I continued reading, an unbelievable story unfolded. During the disputes over his mother's inheritance, Jordan once felt an odd sensation in his leg after walking through a crowd. He discovered a deep cut on his thigh. Shocked, he found a utility knife in his pocket that he used for work. The blade wasn't exposed, but he figured it might have accidentally cut him. The blade wasn't exposed, but Jordan thought it might have accidentally cut him if it hit just the wrong spot. Fortunately, the wound seemed minor and likely to heal quickly, so during that busy time, he chose not to tell me and took care of the injury himself. However, now his sister was implying that she was responsible for the injury. She claimed to have inflicted it in the crowd, aiming for an artery but failing. She even knew the exact location of the wound. I checked Jordan's thigh while he was unconscious and found the old cut. It wasn't that I didn't believe him, but part of me hoped such a wound wouldn't exist. The thought of someone harming another for inheritance was appalling. While receiving an inheritance is certainly better than not, causing harm to increase one's share is reprehensible. However, contrary to my wishes, I found an old cut on Jordan's thigh, clear evidence of his sister's malicious intent. As I felt anger bubbling up, I carefully redressed Jordan and turned my attention back to the letter. Jordan wrote that he was convinced his life was in danger. The hurried writing indicated he had written it while his sister briefly left the room. Oddly, she had insisted on having her son, Jordan's nephew, present during their inheritance discussion before she was disowned. Jordan had adored his nephew, and she probably remembered this. It seemed like she planned to use her nephew as bait in a tearful plea to secure a larger share of the inheritance. Jordan, feeling threatened, had instructed his nephew to give me the letter if anything happened to him. He added in the letter that there was evidence in the inner pocket of his jacket. I searched the jacket he was wearing at the time of his accident. The bloodstains from the fall indicated the severity of the accident. I hadn't touched it since the nurse gave it to me along with his other personal belongings, as instructed. I reached into the inner pocket and found a hard object. It was a voice recorder. I recalled the doctor mentioning that people usually try to protect their heads during a fall, but Jordan had injuries on his arms that suggested he was shielding his chest. The doctor had even asked if Jordan had any heart conditions, which was surprising since Jordan always boasted about his health and had never suffered from any serious illnesses. The voice recorder from the chest pocket explained it all. Jordan had shielded it to protect the evidence at the risk of his own life. I played the evidence Jordan had risked his life to protect and was left speechless. The contents were so shocking that I couldn't find the words to express my astonishment, but it was undoubtedly evidence that could incriminate his sister. I immediately contacted the police. Shortly afterward, Jordan's sister returned cheerfully, patting her stomach and saying she was satisfied. Demanding the chair I was using, she sat down, crossed her legs, and started touching up her makeup. I asked her about the outcome of the inheritance distribution. She claimed that Jordan had agreed to give her a larger share. When I asked if she was with Jordan when he fell, she said they had parted ways right after leaving the cafe where they met and claimed she knew nothing about the accident. She was lying. The discussion had been abruptly changed to take place at the sister-in-law's house, and all the subsequent events were captured on the voice recorder Jordan had protected. I decided not to confront her lies immediately but instead asked other questions about memories with Jordan and their father, why she hadn't told us about her divorce earlier, and how she was living now. I also inquired about when she left the restaurant, how long she stayed there, and the name of the place. However, she soon became irritated and pushed me away, exclaiming, "He was your father. You're just an outsider who married into the family." Indeed, I might not have a direct connection to the inheritance, but Jordan's life-threatening accident certainly involved me. So, I pleaded with her to tell the truth. "Do you think I'm lying?" she retorted, visibly outraged. I played the voice recorder Jordan had risked his life to save. The recording began with Jordan expressing concerns about the difficulty of their conversation and his intention to record it for evidence. His sister immediately pressured him for a larger share of their father's inheritance. Initially, she was somewhat reserved, claiming she needed help raising her nephew alone. But when Jordan rejected her suggestion, demanding that she ask her ex-husband for child support, her demeanor shifted dramatically. She confessed to having inflicted the cut on Jordan's thigh during the dispute over their mother's inheritance. "I thought if you were out of the picture, I'd get more," she said gleefully, though she admitted to being scared back then, limiting her actions to a mere cut. She now boasted about being capable of making it look like an accident. "Be careful of your back and high places. I'm always watching for a chance," she threatened. The fear and tension in Jordan's voice were palpable throughout the recording. Feeling the danger of staying at her house, he cleverly changed the topic and suggested moving to a public place. "There's a great fish restaurant nearby. Let me treat you, sister. Why don't you get ready?" Suddenly, her demeanor shifted, and she left to get ready. At that moment, Jordan quickly wrote a letter to me, entrusting it to his nephew in a hushed voice. He mentioned the voice recorder, hoping I would find it, but just in case, he gave the letter to his nephew. After leaving her house for a restaurant, Jordan treated his sister to lunch, but she remained her usual self. Upon leaving the restaurant, Jordan suggested consulting a lawyer due to the deadlock in their discussion. When Jordan said he was heading home, his sister insisted on accompanying him to the station. During their walk, she tried to dissuade him from involving a lawyer, claiming it would complicate matters. When Jordan refused, she began shouting at him in the street. Remaining calm, Jordan insisted that involving a third party was best and said he would speak to a lawyer he knew. Suddenly, there was a sound like something falling or rolling, followed by commotion and voices calling for an ambulance. The recording stopped, possibly because the stop button was hit when Jordan's jacket was removed for emergency treatment. After the playback ended, the sister-in-law initially seemed shocked, but then became defiant. "So what? How does this prove anything? It's just a sibling argument. It's not about the inheritance dispute, it's about proving that Jordan's fall was not an accident but an incident. That doesn't prove anything. Are you trying to say I'm the culprit? There's no evidence that I did anything." "This is enough evidence to show the police that there's a possibility of foul play," I said. While the sister-in-law was away, the police had already arrived and confirmed the contents of the voice recorder. They had been waiting in hiding, anticipating her return. "Police here?" she gasped in disbelief. She had always looked down on others and seemed to have misguided confidence that she could never be caught or held accountable by the police. As the reality of her actions began to dawn on her, her previously arrogant and confident demeanor shifted to one of fear. The entrance to the hospital room was covertly blocked by plainclothes detectives, posing as visitors. We were on the 4th floor, leaving no easy escape route. Even if she wanted to flee the police, jumping out of a window would not end well for her. A detective entered the room, approaching the sister-in-law, who was frantically looking around with a pale face, desperately searching for an escape route. They wanted to question her since she might have been the last person with Jordan, suggesting the incident was more than an accident. "Maybe it was just someone who looked like me. There are supposedly 3 people in the world who look like each of us," she blurted out, seemingly trying to claim a case of mistaken identity. Despite her voice being recorded on the voice recorder, she tried to use a childish excuse to escape responsibility. I couldn't help but let out a wry smile at her attempt. The police were not swayed by her excuses, dismissing them with a nonchalant, yeah, I get it." Culprits often change their stories and make incoherent statements. Which was exactly what the sister-in-law was doing. As the police took her away, I handed over the voice recorder to the detective in charge, who seemed to be the lead investigator. After the sister-in-law's drama subsided, another person appeared. I had made another call when contacting the police. As the nephew saw the man enter, he exclaimed, "Daddy," and leaped into his father's arms. The former brother-in-law acknowledged me with a nod and then embraced his son, seemingly vowing never to let go. During the interaction between the sister-in-law and the police, the nephew had been scared and hiding behind me. He had been disheartened even after the police left, but his spirits lifted instantly upon seeing his father. This was the first time I had met the former brother-in-law since my mother-in-law's funeral. I had contacted him for a reason. The voice recorder Jordan had safeguarded contained the sister-in-law's true feelings about her son. She had bluntly stated that she never wanted a child and only gave birth because she had to, never feeling any affection for him. Child care was mostly left to the former brother-in-law, and his parents had often helped. So, when they divorced, he thought he would easily get custody. However, desiring child support, the sister-in-law managed to convincingly portray herself as a devoted mother and won custody. It seems that mothers often have an advantage in custody battles. The former brother-in-law had to accept this, thinking maybe she had developed maternal feelings, as she had never mistreated their son. It's often said that women have a maternal instinct, but in the case of the sister-in-law, that theory was an exception. In reality, she only took custody of child support and squandered the money on herself. Her cruel behavior towards her son, such as depriving him of food and locking him in a closet, was routine. Jordan's letter revealed his desire to rescue his nephew from this situation, even if it meant giving up his entire inheritance. Jordan's insistence on involving a lawyer was not only about the inheritance, but also about his nephew's welfare. I couldn't help but feel that behind my husband's unwavering determination, even in the face of the danger posed by his sister, there was a resolve to save our nephew. It made me realize that I too needed to uphold that determination. I never relied on the inheritance. While having it is better than not, we are young and can earn our way. I wouldn't blame Jordan for giving up his inheritance, especially if it was for his nephew's sake. Jordan believed that by offering the entire inheritance, the sister-in-law, driven by greed, would relinquish custody of her nephew. The letter also mentioned that once the nephew was safely away from his mother, he would be entrusted to his father. However, given the harm done to Jordan, simply transferring the inheritance and retrieving the nephew wouldn't be the end of it. I felt the sister-in-law needed to be held accountable and made to regret her actions. The former brother-in-law became increasingly enraged as I relayed everything from Jordan's letter. Seeing his drastically changed son, he blamed himself for what had happened after the divorce. The nephew lived with his mother, but the former brother-in-law had managed to secure a monthly visitation agreement. However, while the sister-in-law consistently demanded child support, she never allowed the former brother-in-law a single visitation. She continuously made excuses to refuse him access to their son. She threatened that if he persisted, he would never see his nephew again, leaving him powerless. Expressing regret for not confronting my sister-in-law sooner or secretly checking on her, her ex-husband apologized repeatedly to his nephew. He then resolved to confront his sister. It turns out she had already been reported, not only for the suspicious circumstances surrounding Jordan's fall, but also for her mistreatment of the child. The youth division arrived, expressing a desire to hear from the nephew. You, as a guardian, were required. My ex-brother-in-law accompanied him, and I was asked to join as well. Jordan's recovery is uncertain. He might regain consciousness in an hour or even a year. Given the urgency of the nephew's situation, prioritizing him seemed the right choice. At the police station, a confrontation occurred between my ex-brother-in-law, who was accompanying his nephew, and Jordan's sister, still just a person of interest at that point. In a moment of distress or perhaps stupidity, she began to make outrageous accusations. It was him. This man told me to do it. He's a demon. I'm the real victim here. Seduced by a demon into marriage, she hysterically labeled her son as a child of a demon. Her ex-husband couldn't stay silent. What do you mean, child of a demon? Stop harming the kid further after pushing Jordan down and continuing your excuses, blaming others. Makes you the real demon, he said. Despite his brother's logical argument, she wouldn't stop threatening. I'll make you suffer the same fate. Everyone at the police station looked disdainfully as she was dragged away by the police. Given the risk she might harm others, she was detained. the investigation quickly advanced. When surveillance footage from a shop near the staircase at the station entrance where Jordan was pushed showed her making a pushing motion, although the camera angle didn't confirm the push, the detective assured them they would get a definitive confession with the sister-in-law in custody. The focus shifted to the nephew's custody. Based on her recorded statements and the nephew's account, it was decided he should stay with my ex-brother-in-law. The nephew was overjoyed to live with his dad, who, along with his parents, was ensuring a comfortable life for him. After the police interrogation, I returned to the hospital and resolved to stay by Jordan's side until he regained consciousness. But the next morning, Jordan regained consciousness. Though there was no concrete proof yet, when Jordan's sister was being questioned by the police, he said he had something to tell the detective. Following Jordan's request, we got the detective to come over. Jordan told the detective that he was pushed from behind by his sister and said that her fingerprints, or rather her handprints, must be clearly on the jacket he was wearing at the time. The forensics confirmed her handprints on the jacket, along with clear fingerprints. However, fearing she might still find a way to deny it, the police went to great lengths to check all the nearby security cameras. Additionally, they appealed to the public for information. Someone who was filming nearby contacted them, saying their footage might have captured the altercation. The person checked their footage after realizing an incident had occurred and found it clearly showed the sister-in-law pushing Jordan. Confronted with undeniable evidence, the sister-in-law was defeated and arrested without resistance. After some recovery, Jordan, through his lawyer, demanded compensation and medical expenses from her, but her bank account was empty, and she owned nothing of significant value. Even her beloved brand bags were all fake, bought from dubious sources. When asked for compensation, she simply said she had nothing to give. Jordan then proposed splitting his father's inheritance equally and later managed to collect the compensation and medical expenses when the inheritance was distributed. Although most of the inheritance went towards Jordan's payments, a small amount did end up with the sister-in-law. However, all the money was used for legal fees for the crimes she committed, and now it seems there is hardly any money left in her account. This was because the sister-in-law, being selfish and not very bright, would end her contract with any lawyer who said something inconvenient for her, even if they were in the middle of an investigation. Since retainer fees are non-refundable, her money kept dwindling as she repeatedly fired lawyers. Eventually, the lawyer she chose, who just followed her orders, apparently couldn't provide a proper defense, making the trial look bleak. After being placed with my ex-brother-in-law, the nephew's emaciated body recovered to a size more fitting for his age. These circumstances heavily influenced the custody battle, and a lawyer skilled in custody issues successfully took the nephew away from the sister-in-law. They argued that proper upbringing was impossible under the sister-in-law due to her parenting style and the severity of her crimes. Emphasizing how much my ex-brother-in-law loved the child, they showed that the nephew wanted to live with him and took into account the care he received after Jordan's sister's arrest, smoothly securing custody. Now, I hear they are living peacefully with my ex-father-in-law and his parents. Sometime after Jordan was discharged and returned to normal life, I started feeling unwell. Worried it might be due to the strain of looking after him, I went for a checkup and found out we were expecting a new life. We talked about using what his sister did as a lesson, hoping to raise our child to always smile and be kind to others. We believe our happiness is just beginning. Let's conclude the story shortly. After Jordan's recovery and the successful custody battle for his nephew, life took on a new, peaceful rhythm. Jordan and his wife, determined to learn from the past, focused on their growing family and rebuilding their lives. They embraced the joy of expecting a child, cherishing the opportunity to raise their little one with kindness and compassion. The nephew, finally free from his mother's manipulative grasp, thrived under the loving care of his father and grandparents. The family, once fractured by greed and deceit, found solace in their newfound unity, a testament to the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. As for the sister-in-law, her actions had consequences. Facing charges of assault and neglect, she was left to grapple with the reality of her choices, a stark reminder that every action reacts. The story serves as a poignant reminder that even in the face of adversity, love and justice can prevail. The family, though scarred by the events, emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable, their future bright with hope. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Retaliation Realm channel. Growing up, it was just me and Mom. Dad bailed when I was just a tyke, a faded memory more than anything else. Mom worked her fingers to the bone, juggling jobs left and right to keep us afloat and to make sure I could hit the books hard. Because of her sacrifices, I snagged a grant that got me through college without the mountain of debt that was common these days. I studied business management, driven by a cocktail of ambition and fear of ever being as broke as we were when I was a kid. After graduating, I packed up my life and moved to the city. It was a tough start, living in a cramped apartment and surviving on ramen and more nights than I'd like to admit. But I landed a job at a large company, started as a junior, and clawed my way up. Fast forward a few years, and I wasn't just working there, I was running a whole department. It was more than a job, it was my turf, and I made sure everyone who worked with me knew they were valued. You got to lead with respect, I'd say during the training for the newbies. Treat this job like you own it, and soon enough you won't just be part of the team, you'll be leading it. The team was solid, a bunch of good folks. When I got the nod for the department head spot, we hit the local bar to celebrate. It was nothing fancy, just a cozy place where the beer was cold and the laughs were plenty. Here's to Erica, the boss lady. Marco, one of my oldest colleagues, raised his glass high. The others joined in, the clinks of glasses echoing over the buzz of the bar. Thanks, guys. We're all in this together. Here's to kicking more ass and taking names. I shouted over the noise, and the team roared back in approval. That night, amid the backslaps and cheers, I noticed him, Jake. He caught me looking and sauntered over with a grin that could knock you off balance. Couldn't help but notice the celebration. What's the occasion? He asked, leaning against the bar. Just a little career boost. I'm the new head of my department now, I said, trying not to sound too braggy. That's impressive. Must be a tough gig, he replied, nodding appreciatively. I'm Jake, by the way. Erica, nice to meet you. Jake and I got to talking, more seriously than I intended that night. Turns out Jake was a financier and knew his way around numbers like I did around project plans. Over the next 6 months, what started as casual dates turned into weekends spent together, and not long after, I was spending more time at his place than my own. He had a killer apartment, high ceilings, a view that made you want to brag about it, and a warmth that my dingy rental couldn't match. One evening, as we were overlooking the city lights from his balcony, Jake turned to me, a serious look washing over his usually playful face. He took my hands in his, and I could feel the nervous energy vibrating through them. Erica, these past months with you have been the best of my life. I know this might seem fast, but when you know, you just know, right? He started, his voice a mix of certainty and hope. I nodded, the cityscape blurring a bit as my heart started to race. He pulled out a small box from his jacket and opened it to reveal a ring that caught the light just right, sparkling almost as much as his eyes. Will you marry me? Erica, yes, Jake. Absolutely yes, I managed, my voice thick with emotion. And just like that, I was engaged. Engaged to a man who saw me, really saw me, and loved all the parts of me, even the ones that were tough as nails. The day I was supposed to meet Jake's parents, my stomach was in knots as Jake drove us up to a sprawling mansion with a driveway longer than my entire apartment block. It hit me, these folks weren't just well off, they were loaded. Stepping out of the car, I could feel the weight of the place. The house looked like something out of an old British movie, all brick and ivy, with gargoyles staring down like they knew I didn't belong. Jake squeezed my hand as we walked up to the huge oak doors. You'll be fine, Erica, he whispered, but his voice sounded like he was trying to convince himself too. The door swung open, and there stood Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove. His suit probably cost more than my rent, and her dress was something you'd see in a magazine. The foyer was massive, with a chandelier overhead that sparkled like a constellation. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking folks with titles like Sir and Lady. Erica, lovely to finally meet you. I'm Charles, and this is my wife, Eleanor, Mr. Hargrove said, his voice smooth but cool with a hint of an English accent that sounded practiced. Mrs. Hargrove gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Pleased to meet you both, I managed, trying to keep my voice steady as we moved into the dining room. Jake whispered quick tips about which fork to use for what, but his words were a jumble in my head. Dinner was served, and it felt like sitting in a freezer, the air so cold with judgment. Mr. Hargrove pointed to a portrait of a stern-looking man with a thick beard. That's Sir Reginald Hargrove, a direct ancestor from England. Came over in the 1800s to establish our family here, he said proudly. Impressive, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic, but it was hard to eat when you felt like every move was being critiqued. I reached for what I thought was the salad fork, but the silence that followed told me I'd messed up. I glanced at Jake for help, but before he could whisper anything, Mrs. Hargrove's voice cut through. Perhaps things are done differently where you come from, dear, she said, each word sharp and precise. Sorry, still getting the hang of all this, I mumbled, my cheeks burning hot. Jake tried to smooth things over, jumping into a story about us, but his parents were more interested in watching my struggle with the dessert spoon next. I felt smaller with each course, their stares heavy on my shoulders. After the icy dinner, we all shuffled into the Hargraves' expansive living room. The plush carpets and heavy curtains made the room feel even more suffocating than the dining hall. I sunk into one of the ornate chairs, feeling like I was an exhibit in a museum about commoners. Mrs. Hargrove perched elegantly on the edge of her seat, leaned forward, and said, Erica, dear, tell us more about your family. Your upbringing must have been quite different from ours. I hesitated, feeling Jake's tense gaze on me. Well, it was mostly just me and my mom. My dad left when I was young, and I don't remember him much. Mom did everything to raise me on her own. She's a nurse. The room fell deathly silent. Mrs. Hargrove stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood floor like a scream. This is unacceptable, she declared, her voice resonating with disgust. We are descendants of an ancient English lineage. We have standards and traditions. I cannot, will not, allow my only son to marry someone without pedigree or knowledge of her lineage. Mr. Hargrove, who had been silently observing the conversation, finally spoke. His words were calculated, each one dropping like a weight. It's essential for us that our family ties are strong and well documented. Erica, can you even name your great-grandparents? I felt my face heat up, the embarrassment gnawing at me. I only know about my maternal grandparents, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hargrove rolled his eyes, a clear sign of contempt. This is exactly what we feared, he muttered under his breath. Jake finally intervened, his tone firm yet pleading. Mom, Dad, please. Erica is kind and hardworking, and she loves me. Isn't that what should matter? His mother's gaze was steely. Respect and adherence to our family standards are what matter, Jacob. If Erica is to join this family, she must learn our ways. She needs to respect where she's coming from, even if it is nowhere significant. Their words stung, slicing through the warm feelings from earlier in the evening, but Jake was looking at me, his eyes begging me to just go along with it. I nodded reluctantly, agreeing to their terms. Fine, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll learn about your family and your traditions. Mrs. Hargrove seemed somewhat placated by my concession. Good. You'll start by familiarizing yourself with our family tree and understanding who each person in those portraits is. It's not just about names, Erica, it's about respect for our lineage. As they continued talking about their expectations, I felt a part of me shrivel up. The evening had turned from a simple meet and greet into a trial by fire. I had agreed to their demands, yes, but at what cost? As the room filled with discussions of ancestors and noble deeds, I couldn't help but feel alienated from these people and, oddly enough, from the parts of Jake that were tied so tightly to them. The weeks following that stiff dinner were a whirlwind. I barely had time to catch my breath between working my day job and attending the slew of etiquette and style courses that Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove insisted I take. My day started with the buzz of an alarm before sunrise and ended long after the sun had set, leaving me feeling like a zombie. Elbows off the table, Erica, the etiquette instructor, chided gently during one of our sessions. And remember, the soup spoon moves away from you when you scoop. I nodded, attempting to mirror her movements, but my mind was on a million other things like the mountain of work waiting for me back at the office and the never-ending wedding plans. You're doing well, she reassured, her voice soothing. These things take time to become second nature. I gave her a weak smile. Thanks, it's a lot, you know. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Mom. I excused myself and stepped outside to take the call, pressing the phone against my ear while trying to find a quiet corner in the bustling city. Hi, Mom, I greeted, my voice more tired than I intended. Erica darling, how are the wedding preparations going? She asked, her voice filled with excitement and a hint of concern. I hesitated, not wanting to worry her. It's all good, learning a lot. Even picked up how to waltz, I said, trying to keep my tone light. There was a pause, and I knew she wasn't entirely convinced. You sound exhausted, honey. Are you getting enough rest? You know, all this shouldn't be so hard. You need to take care of yourself. I chuckled weakly. I'll try, Mom, but there's a lot to juggle right now. Etiquette classes, dance lessons, work, and wedding planning. Just remember what's important, Erica. It's you and Jake at the end of the day, not all these rules and lessons. Her words were a balm, but as soon as we hung up, the weight of reality settled back on my shoulders. I was caught in a tug-of-war between pleasing Jake's parents and maintaining my sanity. Every day felt like a marathon with no finish line in sight. Back inside, I resumed my training, the instructor's voice a droning background noise as I practiced the proper way to hold a wine glass. Pinch the stem, not the bowl. In the rare moments of downtime, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if all this was worth it. The constant scrutiny, the endless classes, the cold looks from Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove whenever I slipped up, which was more often than I liked to admit. One evening, as I was about to drift off to sleep, my phone buzzed. It was Jake. His text lit up the screen. How was your day? Miss you. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to tell him everything, to pour out my frustrations and fears, but I held back. Instead, I typed a simple, miss you too. Long day, but all good. As I set the phone down, the silence in my apartment felt overwhelming. Was this how it was going to be? Pushing through the exhaustion, smiling through the stress, all for the sake of fitting into a world that seemed increasingly alien to me? The big day had finally arrived. The venue was a flurry of flowers, fancy dresses, and the faces of the city's high society milling about. My stomach was in knots as I stood in my long, flowing white dress, trying to catch my breath. My mom came over, adjusting a stray curl on my forehead. Everything will be just fine, Erica, she reassured me with a soft smile. I wanted to believe her, but the minute the ceremony began, any hope of a peaceful wedding evaporated. Jake's parents were on a warpath of superiority. Mr. Hargrove greeted guests with an air of boastfulness, and Mrs. Hargrove was quick to point out to anyone within earshot how they had made everything possible. As the guests settled, I tried to mingle, but Mrs. Hargrove pulled me aside with a frosty smile. Erica, dear, make sure our friends are taken care of. Fetch some drinks. There's a good girl, she instructed, gesturing imperiously towards a group of elderly gentlemen discussing politics loudly. I started, only to be cut off by her sharp glance. No buts. You're practically family now. Show some initiative, she snapped. Reluctantly, I carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres between tables, my dress trailing behind me. The weight of the fabric and the task made me feel more like a servant than a bride. I caught glimpses of Jake laughing and chatting, oblivious to my plight as I passed another round of drinks. I overheard Mrs. Hargrove's voice rise above the chatter. Erica will be serving us tonight. It's good practice for her, don't you think? Her tone was condescending, her eyes scanning the crowd for approval. That was the last straw. I approached her, my hands shaking slightly, but my voice firm. I am not a waitress at my wedding. There are staff here who are supposed to do this. Mrs. Hargrove stood up, her expression one of mock surprise. You should be grateful we allowed such a simple girl into our family. Remember your place, Erica, she hissed, her words like daggers. I felt a flush of anger rise to my cheeks. This is my wedding, not a performance for your friends, I retorted, my voice louder than intended. The room fell silent. All eyes were on us now. Jake, catching the tail end of our exchange, stumbled over, a glass of champagne in hand. What's going on here? He slurred slightly, his eyes not fully focusing. Your mother is treating me like a servant at our wedding, Jake. This isn't what today is supposed to be about, I said, frustration boiling over. Jake looked between me and his mother, his expression clouding. Erica, why are you making a scene? Just do what my mom asks. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal, Jake? This is our day, and your mom is ruining it. I shot back, disbelief and hurt swirling together. He took a long sip of his champagne before speaking. Look, Erica, you should be happy I even chose you. There were plenty of girls better than you, prettier, richer. You're making a fuss over nothing. The words stung like a physical slap. I recoiled, the realization hitting me hard. The man I loved, the man I was about to marry, didn't see us as partners. To him, I was just another accessory, something to be molded and fit into the perfect image his parents wanted. As I clutched my bouquet tighter, feeling like I might crumble right there, my mom came over. She took one look at me and wrapped me in her arms, the kind of hug that seemed to hold the world at bay. Honey, do you love this man? Do you want to marry him? She whispered, her voice filled with worry. I shook my head, barely able to muster the voice to speak. No, Mom. I can't do this. I don't want to. Mom nodded, her jaw setting in that determined way that I knew all too well. She gently took the bouquet from my hands and guided me to a chair, her touch reassuring. Then, with a surprising sprightliness, she approached the DJ, asked for the microphone, and turned to face the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the murmurs, drawing every eye in the room to her. There was a hush, the kind that precedes a storm. She took a deep breath and turned to face Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove directly. I have something important to share about truth and pretense, she began, her gaze unwavering. I went to the same school as Charles and Eleanor Hargrove back then. They didn't carry an English accent or boast of noble blood. Their families were hard-working folks, just like ours. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Charles's father was a mechanic, and Eleanor's mother served tables at the local diner. She paused, letting the words sink in. The portraits, the accents, the surname, they bought them all to craft a past that would hide where they came from. The room erupted into whispers, guests turning to stare at the Hargraves, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Mrs. Hargrove stood up, her face red, the facade of aristocracy melting away. That's preposterous, But my mom wasn't finished. To think that you would stand on these fabrications and look down upon my daughter, judge her worthiness based on a lie. Erica is worth 1,000 of your false titles. She is real, something you've long forgotten how to be. The guests were now openly murmuring, their looks of fascination turning to disdain as they gazed at the Hargraves. Mr. Hargrove tried to speak, his accent slipping into something less refined, more desperate. We did what we thought was best for. For whom? My mom cut him off, her voice fierce. For your son, for society, or just for your shallow pride? The confrontation had drawn everyone's attention, and now the room was buzzing, the atmosphere charged with tension and revelations. The Hargraves seemed to shrink, their grandeur dissolving into the air, leaving nothing but the stark, plain truth of their origins. Jake's face twisted with a mix of shock and anger. He stormed up to me, his voice barely a hiss as he leaned close. "You've ruined everything, Erica. You've disgraced my family, and now you're questioning if I want to marry you after this spectacle." His words stung, but before I could respond, he grabbed my arm, pulling me slightly closer. "I'll teach you how to be a good wife, one who knows her place and obeys." His threat hung in the air, heavy and chilling. I pulled my arm back with all my might, stepping away from him. The room was dead silent now, everyone's eyes on us. This was the man I had intended to marry. This was the family I was about to join. No, this couldn't be my life. I took a deep breath, my mother's earlier strength flowing through me. "There will be no wedding," I announced loudly, making sure every guest heard. "I regret that I ever considered marrying someone who truly matches the arrogance and deceit of his parents." Murmurs filled the room, some of the shock, others of support. Jake stood there, mouth agape, as if trying to catch the words and stuff them back into my mouth. My mother came to my side, her presence a comforting shield against the chaos. Together, we walked through the crowd, our heads held high. In the weeks that followed, news of the Hargraves' disgrace spread through the city. Their fabricated lineage and high society standing crumbled like a house of cards in a breeze. People who once revered them now crossed the street to avoid their shame. They sold their mansion and moved away, seeking a fresh start where their past wouldn't haunt them. As for Jake, I heard bits and pieces, rumors of a downward spiral, of nights spent at bars, trying to drink away the scandal. I didn't know if they were true, and frankly, I didn't care to know. He had shown his true colors, and they were too dark and twisted for me ever to want to look back. "Thank you, Mom," I said to her one evening as we sat in our modest living room, a stark contrast to the opulent falsity I had almost married into. "For everything, for being there, for standing up for me, for helping me see the truth before it was too late." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll always be here, Erica. You're my daughter, and I raised you to be strong and true. No man, no family, can ever make you less than what you are." We sat there, the TV chattering in the background, a normalcy that felt refreshing. I had lost a fiancé but gained back my life, my self-respect, and more importantly, my future. After the whole wedding debacle, going back to work felt like walking into a sanctuary. My colleagues, who had heard about the chaos, were nothing short of supportive. "Erica, you dodged a bullet, girl," Marco said as soon as I walked into the office. He was leaning against my desk, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, which he handed to me as a peace offering, or maybe a welcome-back gift. "Thanks, Marco. Feels good to be back," I replied, taking the coffee and savoring the familiar bitter warmth. "And yeah, that bullet was more like a cannonball," Jenny chimed in from her cubicle across the way. "Anyone who makes you serve guests at your wedding is no husband material. You deserve way better, hun." I smiled, grateful for the camaraderie. "I think so too. It's nice to be back where I'm appreciated for what I do, not for the family I might have married into." As the days turned into weeks, the support from my team didn't waver. It was during this healing time that I met Brian. He was a friend of a friend, nothing fancy about his background, just a genuine guy with a quick smile and an easygoing attitude that was infectious. We met at a small get-together. It was low-key, just a few friends hanging out on a Saturday afternoon. He was there, laughing at something silly, when I walked in. "Hey, you must be Erica," he said, standing up to greet me. "I've heard a lot about you, all good things, I promise." "Thanks, Brian." "I hope they didn't embellish too much," I replied, trying to match his easy demeanor. We hit it off instantly. His family was the polar opposite of the Hargraves. The first time I met his parents, they welcomed me with warm hugs and genuine smiles. "Erica, we're just glad Brian found someone who makes him so happy," his mom said, pulling me into a hug as soon as I stepped through their front door. It was refreshing, the simplicity of it all, no pretenses, no demands, just mutual respect and acceptance. Brian and I weren't rushing anything. We were taking our time, getting to know each other beyond the surface level. Back at work, my boss called me into his office one day. "Erica, I just want to say we've all noticed how you've handled everything. It's not been easy, but you've managed to keep your performance top-notch." I nodded, unsure where this was leading. "We think it's time for another promotion. You've proven you can handle just about anything, and your leadership has never wavered." Leaving his office, I felt a surge of pride. With a new relationship developing, a career on the rise, and the respect of those I cared about, I was finally in a place where I felt I belonged.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen, a 31-year-old from Jacksonville, Florida. I'm contemplating a change of scenery soon. My journey has been a bit of a roller coaster, particularly enduring a challenging marriage for over a year. Thankfully, with my dad and some help from law enforcement, I managed to navigate my way out. Looking back, I recognize my role in those choices and sometimes wish I had been more discerning. I've always been quite reserved and not much of a social butterfly, preferring the company of my computer and the vast digital universe over real-life interactions. On the rare occasions I did step out, like going to a bar, I'd keep to myself, especially when strangers attempted to befriend me. The thought of being kidnapped by someone I barely knew was enough to keep me at a distance. My mother passed away when I was just 5 due to a heart condition that went untreated, leaving me in the sole care of my father, a dedicated Marine. His job took him away on long voyages, leaving me to miss him dearly. Despite the distance, he did his best to stay connected with us through letters and calls. The day we lost my mom, he rushed back to comfort me, finding me inconsolable at her funeral. He lifted me into his arms, offering comfort and promising that everything would be okay now that he was back. Clinging to him, I cried myself to sleep that night, lulled by the sound of his voice humming my favorite lullaby. His strength and love have been my guiding light through the darkest times, teaching me resilience and hope. I remember seeing him once, sitting quietly by himself on the sofa with a drink in his hand. He looked so forlorn and pale, occasionally whispering to himself before he buried his face into a cushion and wept. It was only the second time I'd ever seen him cry, the first being when I had a little accident on a slide and ended up getting hurt. Perhaps he felt guilty about everything that had unfolded in our lives. He decided to take a couple of months off work, and before he left again, he made arrangements for me to stay with my grandmother, who would look after me in his absence. "Yes, Dad, I will," I assured him, my heart heavy with his impending departure. He expressed his eagerness to taste the dishes I would learn to make by the time he came back. Then, with a final hug and a promise to take care of myself, he was gone. His work meant he would be away for 5 months or more, during which he'd send me gifts and souvenirs from his travels. While he was gone, I helped Grandma with the household chores and kept to myself, preferring the solitude of our home over the company of other kids. As I grew older, this preference for solitude deepened, and I found solace in the virtual world, where I could interact with others without the anxiety that real-world interactions brought. The internet became my window to the world, a place where I could explore endless stories and connect with people on a level I found both exhilarating and comforting. I didn't need to face anyone directly. I could share my thoughts, feelings, and interests anonymously, finding friends who understood and accepted me. Through these digital connections, I encountered diverse cultures and perspectives, realizing how much we all have in common despite our apparent differences. The internet bridged the gap between continents, making the world a smaller, more interconnected place. During this virtual exploration, I met Joseph, a streamer. Our friendship began with chats and progressed to video calls. Though we both kept our identities somewhat concealed, I wore a Batman mask, and he used a scarf and a beanie to obscure his face. Hi, Helen. It's great to finally see you, he greeted me during 2 of our calls. Hello, Jose. Nice to meet you, even if it's just virtually, I replied, my voice tinged with nervous excitement. He assured me it was normal to feel nervous, but promised it would get easier with time. Our conversations were a mixture of everyday banter and deeper discussions, a testament to the strange yet wonderful friendships formed in the age of the internet. Don't worry, I don't bite. I guess we're both a bit awkward, huh? It's our first real conversation, after all, I started, breaking the ice as we delved into our first significant chat. So, Jose, I'm curious. What brought you to this online world? Jose shared his enthusiasm for meeting new people and discovering diverse viewpoints. I'm a bit of a homebody, and this digital community felt like the right place to connect with others from the comfort of my own space. How about you? I admitted to my introverted nature, explaining how traditional social settings felt daunting, and how online platforms offered a layer of comfort that made it easier for me to express myself. I find these virtual connections incredibly rewarding. It's serendipitous that we met here, I added. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, filled with exchanges of interests and personal anecdotes. I found myself relaxing more with each topic we covered. I never imagined I'd be this at ease talking to someone over the internet. Thanks for making it so seamless, Josie. This means a lot to me. The feeling's mutual, Helen. You're an excellent conversationalist, and I'm glad we connected. If you ever feel like chatting again, just hit me up. I'm usually around playing games. Oh, do you game? Jose asked, his curiosity piquing. I'd like that, I replied. But no, I'm more into blogging and browsing Reddit. It's fascinating what you can discover there. I often find myself learning more from the experiences shared by others than anything else. Exactly. Sometimes our own lives can feel so mundane. There's something special about diving into the lives of others online. I find myself trusting my internet friends more than my real-life ones, Jose confessed. He appreciated the no-strings-attached nature of online friendships, where you're free to engage as much or as little as you prefer. As our conversation unfolded, Jose and I formed a genuine bond, a friendship that felt real despite the digital barrier. Our open-mindedness and mutual understanding highlighted the unique connection you can find in the least expected places. This digital journey of mine has undoubtedly shaped my identity and the way I approach the world. The lessons and experiences from my online haven have become an integral part of who I am. However, my dad, ever cautious, would likely disapprove of these unseen friendships. The last time he visited, he took the opportunity to lecture me on the importance of real-world connections over dinner. "How are your studies going, Dove?" he had asked, unaware of my recent graduation, a milestone he missed. Our conversation hinted at the gaps in our real-life interactions, underscoring the complexities of my digital and physical worlds colliding. I was swamped with responsibilities and felt bad about it then, just as I do now. I even sent you an email to let you know I'd make it for your birthday tomorrow. Tomorrow's my pumpkin's birthday. Please don't use nicknames. I'm not 5 anymore, I had to remind him, though he still sees me as his little dove. That's just it, Dad. I don't know how to, but I'll try. I do have friends, but they're online, I admitted. Why bring Mom into this? What are you implying? I snapped, hurt by the direction of our conversation. I'm not implying anything, dear. I'm just saying it's important to find ways to move forward, as much as we both miss her, he gently explained. But I couldn't contain my frustration. I slammed the table, got up without finishing my meal, and stormed off to wash my plate, leaving my dad trying to reach out. Helen, don't take that tone with your father. I'm just trying to help, he said, his voice a mix of concern and disappointment. You don't understand me, so don't try, I retorted, anger boiling over. I retreated to my online world to find Josie, someone who seemed to understand. Jose was kind and a good listener, someone I could vent to about the growing frustration within me. Being an introvert, I've always found solace and comfort at home, in front of my computer screen. While others embraced the world outside, I cherished the safety of my digital haven, a place where I could be myself without the anxiety of real interactions. My father, however, couldn't grasp this. He believed my preference for online life was limiting my personal growth and insisted I experience the world beyond my comfort zone, a thought that filled me with dread. I shared my worries with Joseph, hoping he'd grasp the situation I was in. "Hey, Helen, would you like to meet in person? We're both introverts, so we could pick a quiet place with few people around." "I know just the spot," he suggested gently, understanding my need for a comfortable setting. "No worries, take all the time you need. I'm here whenever you're ready." "Here's my address. You're always welcome," Joseph offered, extending an invitation with patience and kindness. "Why are you so nice to me? I'm practically a stranger," I couldn't help but wonder aloud. "Because I genuinely like you. It might sound odd coming from me, but I'd love to get to know you better. Whenever you feel the same, you know where to find me," he responded with sincerity, making my heart flutter with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. The thought of stepping out into the real world to meet Joseph was daunting. Yet filled with a blend of excitement and anxiety, I found myself outside his home, ready to face the unknown. He lived surprisingly close, just a 35-minute drive away. I gathered my courage, took a deep breath, and knocked on the weathered door. It creaked open, and there was Joseph with a welcoming smile that immediately calmed my nerves. He was charming, and his home, though modest, radiated a warmth and genuine character. The cozy interior, adorned with beloved books, board games, and his personal workspace, spoke volumes about his personality. "Welcome to my humble abode," Joseph greeted, his voice filled with an eagerness that made me smile. "Your gracious presence brightens my day." I chuckled at his gaming lingo. "Thank you. It's quite a cozy place." "Do you live here alone?" "No, my princess. I share the house with my mom. She stays downstairs, while I have the top floor to myself." "Let me give you a tour," he offered, leading me through his space. As the day unfolded, we engaged in deep conversations, shared laughter, and discovered even more about one another. Meeting Joseph in person added a new dimension to our relationship, deepening the bond we had formed online. His kindness and authenticity were even more palpable face-to-face, enriching our connection and making me appreciate the person behind the digital persona even more. Josie's unique humor and genuine nature drew me closer to him as we spent more time together. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, he suggested a walk in the nearby park. I found myself eagerly agreeing, my earlier nerves melting away into comfort and ease. Walking with him felt like a natural continuation of our online conversations, now enriched with the immediacy and depth that only face-to-face interactions can provide. During our walk, I confided in him about not celebrating my birthday, explaining how a recent argument with my dad left me feeling too unsettled to face any celebration. "I'm really sorry to hear that, but I believe he'll understand in time. He's your dad, after all," Jose tried to comfort me. However, as Jose and I grew closer, I began to see another side of him. Despite his sweet words at first, he became possessive and jealous once we started dating. He demanded constant communication, reacting with anger if I spoke to others. His claims of love and protection seemed sincere at first, but I soon questioned why I had so readily believed him. To my dismay, I learned his mother disapproved of our relationship. Knowing she harbored negative feelings towards me, someone she hadn't met, was disheartening. I struggled to understand her stance, given the genuine care and love Jose and I shared. His close bond with his mother was clear, and while I respected their relationship, it introduced a wedge between us. Despite Jose's assurances, I felt like an outsider, caught in the shadow of his mother's disapproval. The most confusing aspect was her contradicting attitude towards our future. She seemed to push for our marriage, perhaps seeing me as someone who could cater to her needs, given my lack of family support. This perspective was a stark contrast to the understanding I sought from a potential mother-in-law. Not every parent is perfect. Look at your dad, for instance. "At least my mom cares about me," Jose would say, failing to see how his words stung. His remarks about my father not loving me were especially painful. "Please, Josie, it hurts when you talk like that." "You know how complex my relationship with my dad is?" I pleaded, seeking empathy. In this tangled web of emotions and relationships, I found myself questioning the very foundations of our connection. The love and understanding I initially felt from Jose now seemed overshadowed by possessiveness, jealousy, and familial complications. I tried to adapt, to stop lamenting my situation, and aim to make the best of things. Despite the foreboding sense of unease, I ended up in a clandestine marriage with Joseph. He convinced me that my father would never accept our union, persuading me that my dad's absence was a sign of his lack of love. So, without inviting my dad or anyone else from my side, I married Joseph, stepping into a situation I sensed was fraught with risk. I criticized myself for my lack of strength, attributing my vulnerabilities to the environment I grew up in rather than acknowledging the manipulation I was under. The marriage soon revealed a harsher side of Joseph's mother than I had ever imagined. She embodied cruelty, taking delight in undermining my confidence and joy. Her tactics were insidious at first, snide remarks and demeaning comments that gradually eroded my self-esteem. I held on to the hope that her animosity would diminish over time, but it only escalated into relentless emotional abuse. Her criticisms were relentless. "This meal is a disgrace. You expect my son to eat this? Start over," she would sneer. Or, "This place is filthy. Are you incapable of cleaning properly? And get up and take out the trash. Were you raised with no manners at all?" Each word from her was like a blow, designed to belittle me and shake my sense of self-worth. She questioned my decisions, dismissed my accomplishments, and manipulated situations to make me feel unworthy of Joseph's love. Meanwhile, Joseph remained oblivious or indifferent, absorbed in his own world, leaving me to fend for myself in this toxic environment. I felt trapped in a never-ending nightmare, my spirit and resilience wearing thin under the constant barrage of cruelty. The regret of pushing my father away haunted me. His departure after a heated argument right before this entire ordeal left me feeling isolated and full of remorse. I berated myself for my perceived weaknesses, for allowing myself to be drawn into this situation. One day, feeling under the weather and overwhelmed by everything, I sought solace in a nap on the sofa, hoping to find some reprieve in sleep. But any chance of rest was abruptly shattered when a cold splash of water jolted me awake, a harsh reminder of the relentless hostility that had become my daily reality. Waking up in a state of shock and fear, I found myself facing Anne, my mother-in-law, who looked at me with utter disdain. "Why are you loafing on the sofa? Did you even bother to do the shopping I asked you to?" Her voice dripped with contempt. I remained silent, unable to respond to her accusations. "So, you expect me, an old woman, to handle everything while you do nothing?" she sneered before striking me across the face and calling for Joseph. I reached my breaking point. I refused to do anything more for you or your son. "I'm done being treated like this. Find someone else to torment," I declared, my patience exhausted. I'd received nothing but disrespect from this family, and I couldn't stand it any longer. As I attempted to leave, a blunt object struck me from behind and darkness engulfed me. When consciousness returned, I found myself in a dimly lit, semi-dark room, pain throbbing through my head. Struggling to stand, I stumbled, overwhelmed by pain and confusion about my whereabouts. Faint, distorted sounds grew clearer as they neared. Desperately, I crawled toward a metal door with a small window, using it to pull myself up. The door suddenly swung open, revealing Joseph with a mocking smile. "Scared of the dark, are we?" he taunted. I pleaded with him to let me out, promising to change, to no longer voice any complaints. But his response was cold and merciless. "This is your punishment for disrespecting my mother. You'll stay here, cut off from the world. After all, who's going to miss you? Your mother's gone, and your father doesn't care about you. You had a chance to start anew here, but you've squandered it," he sneered. There, in the cold, dark basement, a mixture of fear and rage coursed through me. How had my life spiraled into this nightmare? All I had done was stand up against unjust demands, and now I was trapped, punished for seeking respect and dignity. In the depths of my despair, feeling the consequences of asserting myself, I discovered my phone in my pocket. It was damaged, its screen barely alive, yet a glimmer of hope sparked within me. Amidst the darkness, the faint light of the screen blinked back at me. With my father's number etched in my memory, I dialed it, my hands shaking and tears blurring my vision. I recounted my ordeal through a trembling voice, clinging to the slim chance that he could rescue me from this terror. 3 days later, as despair nearly claimed me, the sound of a car outside signaled a sliver of hope. My heart raced as I listened for the footsteps approaching. The door finally opened to reveal my father, a pillar of strength and resolve. The sight of him flooded me with a mix of relief and disbelief. He had come to my rescue, bringing police officers with him. Jose and Anne were quickly apprehended, their feeble attempts to deny their actions falling flat. "You have no idea what's waiting for you in court," my dad declared with rightful anger. Despite their protests and excuses, their fate was sealed. As my dad led me out of that dark, confining space, I felt a surge of courage and resolve. The harrowing experience, though far from easy, had revealed an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. With my father's steadfast support, I emerged ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. I resolved then to always stand up for myself, to never again let anyone silence my voice. The hope for justice burned within me, a wish to see Jose and his mother face the consequences of their actions. I decided to start anew, leaving Jacksonville for Augusta, Georgia with my dad, seeking safety and a fresh start away from the memories that haunted me. This ordeal also taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers of trusting strangers online. A lesson I'll carry with me always.